Okay, good afternoon. We will call to order this regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for Tuesday, January 14th, 2020, our first regular meeting of the new decade. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Absolutely. Trustee Calvert. Here. Trustee Caudill. Here. President Simon Holland.
Here.
Trustee Kelly. Here. Trustee Minetto. Here. Vice President Raymond. Here. Clerk Taylor, I'm here, and Student Trustee Noble. Thank you very much, Madam President. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Counsel, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Mr. Counsel.
World champion LSU Tigers.
Go Tigers. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you.
You bet, thank you.
He claims that LSU are the world champions of college football now, but we know they're the national champions. Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
On that happy note, so moved.
Okay, motion by Dr. Taylor, second by Trustee Caudill. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And we won't note the blazing red colors we have that our two colleagues are wearing that Mr. Caudill was very anxious to note that we don't wear red, huh? Okay, our next item is annual reorganization of the Board of Trustees. And this is a very important date for our board, and so I would like to ask Chief General Counsel Rombardo to discuss the process for us, and we will ultimately have a motion on the process for nomination of and election of officers.
So as we've discussed in the past, the open meeting law makes this a little cumbersome in that you do have to have an action and a vote of the board. So what we do is we'll open it up for nominations. Any member of the board can nominate another member of the board or him or herself to the position. In this case, I think we're starting with the president of the board. The person that's nominated should indicate that he or she accepts the nomination. There can be multiple nominations, and then at some point the nominations are closed and a motion is made. If the motion is made to elect John Doe and John Doe gets 4 votes, then John Doe's the winner. And that's it. You don't take action on every single person who's nominated. So that's how it works, and that's how the action occurs. Does that make sense? Are there any questions?
It does. Any questions anyone has?
And I think there's a public comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Public comment?
Todd Bailey.
Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Madam President. I agree. This is the second or maybe third most important thing the board can do is deciding on the officers of the board. As you know, the president, I believe the clerk, help decide the agenda. So the two people you're about to elect are very important this next year. You're selecting a superintendent. There's many challenges we've discussed over the last few months. And so the person who's going to be the board president and the secretary are very, very important. As members of the public, we're looking for competitive races and robust debate. After all, how are we to determine who amongst you board members are best to lead the district through these challenges, except with competitive races and robust debate? Now, obviously, you are the ones who actually make the decision. However, I imagine you're looking for input from the public on who those officers may be, and the only way we can give that constructive input is with competitive races with robust debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. And I hope that the years of service of each of these trustees constitute some robust debate. I think the public seeing us every meeting time and on television and at schools and at community events certainly gives them an opportunity to know who our trustees are and what they do. So let's take a vote on that process as described by our General Counsel. Is there a motion to adopt the process as described by the General Counsel?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Is there a second? second by Trustee Calvert. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. We will now move to, and just to clarify, Mr. Bailey, we're electing a president, a vice president, and a clerk. So the first election is for president of the Board of Trustees from among the following: Jacqueline Calvert, Andrew Caudill, Scott Kelly, Ellen Minetto, Melina Raymond, and Angela Taylor. I took my name out of consideration. So is there a nomination? Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. Since you're not listed on here, I'll bypass that as an option. But I would like to nominate Vice President Raymond for the
Thank
office
you.
of President.
And we do seconds on that, or is it just a?
Right now, we just take the nominations.
Okay.
And then we'll go
Okay.
close nominations.
All right. Are there any other nominations? Okay, let's close the nomination. I'm assuming you accept that nomination, Vice President Raymond? She does. Okay. Is there public comment? Thank you, JJ.
Todd Bailey.
Just public note, there's no competition for this. Nobody else wanted to be president. Just one nomination. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Okay, we have a motion or a nomination of Vice President Raymond as President of the Board of Trustees for the year 2020. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. And now you take over.
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
Good try.
Hold on.
You gotta get the other
Hold
two.
on. We gotta get
Why do
the
we
other two. Hold on there. 2.05.
That was the funniest thing that I've seen since you've been
That's the quickest exit ever.
I don't want anyone to think I haven't enjoyed being president of this board. I have enjoyed being president of the board, and I appreciate the confidence of my fellow trustees, and I was just anxious to provide due respect.
Clearly.
Due respect and honor to the new president. Yes. 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 President Raymond.
Well, while I had the chance, I just wanted to say thank you to President Simon Holland, past president, for 2 years of, just incredible service as our president. And I have had the opportunity to serve as your vice president for those 2 years and have learned an immense amount from you and had the privilege of watching you kind of guide us all through some tough processes. So thank you for everything, and I am honored to try to fill a tiny part of your shoes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Melina. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I was
Thank you
just
so
gonna-
much for that.
Thank you, Madam President. I was just going to make sure that certainly you were recognized for your leadership. And really, since you came on the board, just your involvement, your engagement, and giving all of yourself to this district, to the students, to the community in this role. So again, just wanted to concur. That's the comment I wanted to
thank
make.
you.
So,
Thank
but don't
you,
leave
Dr.
yet.
Taylor.
We still have a couple more things for you
Okay.
to do.
All right. Thank you. And thank you very much, Dr. Taylor, and thank you, Trustee Raymond. And I do feel very, very confident that President Raymond will do an outstanding job in leading us through the next year. It's a big year for this district and a very exciting year. I think we've all accomplished a lot together, and I've been very grateful for the opportunity, so thank you. Okay, let's then, since I'm still doing this, let's move on to the board nomination and election of Vice President of the Board of Trustees from among the following: Jacqueline Calvert, Andrew Caudill, Scott Kelly, Ellen Minetto, and Angela Taylor. Any nomination? Yes, President Raymond.
Thank you. I would like to nominate Trustee Dr. Angela Taylor for Vice President.
Okay. Are there other nominations? Ms. Minetto?
I would like to nominate Trustee Kelly.
Okay. So we vote on these in the order of the...
What you would do is close.
Oh, are there any other nominations? Okay.
Yeah,
And then
close the nominations.
close the nominations. Now we'll
And
take
ask for a
public comment.
motion
Well, let's
for
take public comment.
Yeah, yeah.
Todd Bailey.
Madam President, for the office of Vice President, I rise in support of Trustee Scott Kelly. Generally, I support Ms. Taylor. However, there's still this controversy or unresolved issue of the contributions from the superintendent. And we've really never gotten an answer about that. When you accepted a political contribution from Superintendent Tracy Davis and then proceeded to vote on issues that came before the board. And so for that reason, we cannot support you. Thank you.
Do either of the candidates want to give us a statement of their willingness to serve? Since we just want to confirm that you're willing to serve.
I'll do it, Madam President. Having been on the school board now for 7 years and never had the opportunity to be vice president, it's something that I would, I think, do if chosen from my fellow trustees with the utmost professionalism and dedication. And I certainly have the ability, because my full-time job has quite a bit of flexibility, so I'd have the ability to do all the things that I think a vice president has to do.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Taylor?
Thank you, Madam President. And I would say, although I guess a couple of things, is I certainly respect and would certainly support, should the board choose for Trustee Kelly to be the vice president. I am certainly looking forward to an opportunity to serve. I've served in leadership before and know what those responsibilities are. And I know that I'm fully prepared and able to meet them. And I would like to just say something in case there are any concerns at all. I don't think that any member of this board will question my commitment to doing what's best for the district, in particular as it pertains to former Superintendent Davis, as indicated by my previous experience. So I don't think I need to say much more about that. So I thank you for the nomination, and I'd be certainly willing to serve if given the opportunity.
Okay. Is it appropriate for us to have discussion? I just as one trustee, I know how important it is for the president and the vice president to work closely together, and I think both of our candidates are great trustees, and both of our candidates would serve equally well. I lean towards having the president be able to identify who best that president thinks they can be supported by and fall back on if the need be. And so I would honor President Raymond's nomination for vice president. Any other comments anyone wants to make? Okay, well, we'll go in order then. All those in favor of Angela Taylor for vice president? What?
In this case,
Oh, I
we
have
get
to
two
close the.
candidates. Why don't we do a motion? So if somebody puts forth the motion.
Okay,
there's a
and I
second.
didn't close I didn't officially close it. Are there any other nominations? No. Okay, so we'll officially close the nominations.
Then just ask for a motion and then a second, just like you would. So
Okay.
I move to appoint Angela Taylor, or I move
Okay.
to appoint Scott
Okay.
Kelly, and then you'll vote on that. And it takes 4 votes to carry the
Okay,
question.
all right. So I would ask for motions then. Okay, President Raymond?
So, and it's okay that I make the motion? Okay. So I would like to move to appoint Dr. Angela Taylor as vice president of the school board.
Okay, does anyone wish to second? Second by by Ms. Trustee Calvert. Okay, so that we'll vote on that motion. Okay, so all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. I didn't hear your vote, Mr. Caudell. What was your vote, aye or nay? Yay, okay. Okay, well then then Dr. Taylor is our next vice president. All right, okay, thank you. Okay, and then board nominations and election of clerk of the Board of Trustees from among the following: Jacqueline Calvert, Andrew Caudell, Scott Kelly, Ellen Minetto, and the rest are taken. Okay. Is there a nomination? Yes, Ms. Calvert.
Ellen Minetto.
Do you wish to serve? Okay. Ms. Minetto respectfully declines. I would nominate Andrew Caudell as clerk of the board. Are you willing to serve, sir? Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Public comment?
Well, again, non-competitive, but we do support Andrew Caudill for the clerk. We think his voice actually should be higher up on the table and be able to be a little more involved in the decision-making of the direction of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Okay, no other nominations. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Caudill. Okay, now do I get to move? Okay, we will be in recess to reorganize our places on the board, and thank you all very much for the privilege of serving you as your president. All right, we will call the meeting back to order. Thank you all. Okay, the next thing on our agenda today is the consent agenda items. And so we're looking for approval of consent agenda items 3.02 through 3.14. Do any of the trustees have questions or want to pull any of these items from the consent agenda? Move to approve. Great. Do I have a second? All right. And do we have any public comment on consent agenda? All right. Before we call for a vote, I just would like to see, I know we have three committees, items 3.08, 3.09, and 3.10, where we're approving new members to these committees. I wondered if any of those individuals were in the audience tonight, and if so, could they please stand so we can recognize you for your service. Thank you. Appreciate all that you're going to be doing the service and the time you'll be committing to that. So thank you all. All right. May I get a vote to approve the consent agenda items? Or I have a motion and a second, so I'm looking for a vote. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? All right. The motion passes, and that takes us on to agenda item number 4.01, which is public comment. JJ, do we have public comment?
Verna Nuno.
Good afternoon, Board of Trustees. I'm Verna Nuno. I'm a member of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony and a Washoe and Paiute tribal member of the colony. I reside on the Reno Sparks. The first thing I would like to bring to your attention is that our community and myself, we were not really aware of the rezoning that you guys are doing for our particular area, which includes the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. I think our concern was that for myself and others is that we first heard about this on the TV in June, I believe, of 2019. And what we would have liked to have had is to have been considered to have input regarding rezoning that was happening with our particular area and our students. We have 30-plus students that attend Hidden Valley Elementary at the present time. And I think that I would like to advocate for our children that are currently attending Hidden Valley Elementary School. Our children have been attending there for quite a few years now. And with the Washoe County School District's rezoning of multiple schools in an effort to address equitability and overcrowding, as well as preparing for growth in South Reno and eliminating multiple feeder schools, our children attending Hidden Valley have been rezoned for Roger Corbett Elementary School. And it is our knowledge that our children will be moving from school at 60% capacity to a school at 96%. They'll be moving from a school with a balance of diversity to a school that is 80% Hispanic, and moving from a school that is not a Title I or a Title I school, more or less low income, and most of our families like I said, learned about this from the local coverage on TV. And if at all possible, for the Board of Trustees to reconsider not rezoning our children from Reno Sparks Indian Colony, because what you are taking is 30 children plus who ride a bus out to Hidden Valley, and we'll be taking them from the Reno Sparks Indian Colony over to Roger Corbett. I hope by bus, if that's the plan for the Board of Trustees. And right now, me as a grandma of children who attend Hidden Valley Elementary, I would like to see them remain there, if at all possible. They're receiving the best education. My little granddaughter, Gabriella, she's 7, the school there, and the teachers love her. They really like having her there. She herself has told the staff there at Hidden Valley she would like to be a teacher when she gets big. So that is my comment, and I would really like to stress to the board, if there's any way possible to consider, I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pamela Abercrombie.
Good evening, Board of Trustees. My name is Pamela Abercrombie. I'm the Education Manager of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, and with that comes the responsibility of serving the community of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. We, as a leader of the Education Department, I represent many voices here right now with my voice. There are two other tribal members in the room that are here to speak, one you've already heard, but my voice does represent those that do not feel comfortable coming to a meeting and speaking, that do not feel comfortable coming and talking before a board such as yourself. We were not aware. There was the Connect Ed that came out, that apparently that's what I've been told, that our agenda, that we would have been affected by one agenda item. I did listen to the audios for the rezoning for February, March, and April. And in April, it was brought up that the rezoning alternative app that was voted upon, and that affected our community. I know that Corbett also had a different rezoning that affected other communities, but I believe our community is the only community that's being moved from Hidden Valley to Corbett. Our children do not deal with transition well. Our children have, a history of being moved in the district quite a few times. There's been tons of growth, and the data is there. I've looked into the data for Hidden Valley and seen the growth of our children over the last few years. We have a teacher from Hidden Valley that comes and works with our kids at the colony, and that way they can get that double support and they can get that summer support. We've built a support system for our children at Hidden Valley Elementary School, and I do really would like you to reconsider looking at that zoning and how you can just cut that little corner so that our children can continue to go to Hidden Valley. Our community is in an uproar at this time. They do not want our children moved. They do not want our children going to Corbett. I do agree, Corbett is an excellent school. I did take the time to tour Corbett. I did take the time to meet with the current principal. I'm extremely impressed with the school. I feel that our children would do well at that school, but it's not what I want. It's what our community wants. I cannot advocate for Corbett when our community does not want to be removed from Hidden Valley. Our children are doing well there, and our children already have that support system there. We do have a high number of children on special education, so those children are challenged even more with being moved and transitioning. So with that, I would like you to reconsider that one little line that has cut our community in half, basically, by moving our children from a school that has became their community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rena George.
Hama na Rena George Minania Nama. Hi, I'm Rena George, and I'm a Paiute and a tribal member at the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. I have 3 children that attend Hidden Valley. I'm a mother of 5, and I would like, the rest of my children to get the best education as well, And I attended Roger Corbett as a kid, and it was crazy, and they're getting the best education right now at Hidden Valley. Both my sons, my 2 oldest sons, are on special education, and they only have like 4 kids in their classroom with them that they get pulled out with, and I believe it's going to be way higher at Roger Corbett due to them not being able to speak English there at that school, and also I just feel like we didn't get enough time to fight. You know, I didn't get notified until August when I was trying to get my kids' backpacks, and then the colony was telling me that they're moving the kids, and then I had found out when I was at another board meeting that they already finalized it. So I really do hope you guys could reconsider and hear us, you know, because there's more of us that disagree with this. I mean, it's only 30 plus kids, and I know you guys want them to go to Roger Corbett, Vaughn, and Worcester, but some of our kids don't even go to those schools after elementary. They'll go to PL or boarding schools, you know, and I just don't think our community will, you know, bother anybody. You know, we always get pushed down to the bottom being Native American. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I hope you guys hear us.
Thank you.
Todd Bailey.
That was beautiful. Madam President, congratulations. We made a public information request for a redacted copy of the taxpayer-funded Solutions for Worker report, and it was denied. It was a very complicated legal denial of a public information request. It relies on a case in Nevada known as Don Ray, or News Channel 8, versus Bradshaw, which is Chief Bradshaw. And I welcome the chance to review that and bring it back to show you what the court said about that so everyone can understand what it means. We are not lawyers. The lawyer we are relying on is the Honorable Judge Palaha. In his June 2018 decision, over 18 months ago, he ordered the district to release the information we are requesting. In his order, he cited the district's reasoning not to release the Solutions at Work report. Quote, public ridicule for subjective decision-making regarding sensitive information, unquote. That makes this an improper use of attorney-client, whatever you want to call it. It is personal, not school district. Personal agendas are behind the lack of transparency, and this denial has the effect of ending this as a legal question. It becomes a political one. Through you, Board President, to the Acting Superintendent, we are requesting the Acting Superintendent release the Solutions at Work report as requested. Just like the Reno City Manager did in a similar situation. To ensure transparency and public trust, we are currently seeking that order so that you will have an example to work off of. As an applicant for the superintendent position, your leadership on this issue will be recognized. It has been suggested, including in a lawsuit against you, that the report is being withheld until after the superintendent's search is complete in order to protect certain administrators. At a minimum, it is ironic that top administrators of Washoe County School District, who are often paid $10,000, $15,000, or even $20,000 a month, would tell a judge they are afraid of, quote, public ridicule for subjective decision-making regarding sensitive information. That is exactly why administrators are paid such high salaries. They make tough decisions and explain them to the public. They don't hide them. How can the public make an objective determination about who's best to lead this community as a superintendent or as a trustee through an election while this information, in violation of a judicial order, is withheld? They cannot. What's the disposition of this case? Is it at the Supreme Court? Or did a public relations firm convince the Gazette-Journal to stop chasing it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
That's all I have.
Okay. We have one more sneaking in.
Malia Pukta.
Hi, sorry, I was at a PTO meeting that overlapped. I don't know if anybody else spoke on this earlier because I was at a PTO meeting, but I was very strongly affected by the student that was hit by Shaw Middle School last week. I have 2 children there, and while taking them to school, I saw a mangled bicycle on the side of the road. And I don't know what needs to happen before something is done to protect our children. Depending on what source it's coming from, there's anywhere between 20 and 24 students that have been hit on their way to or from school. This year, we have not had that many weeks in this school year so far. So we are on average more than 1 student per week hit while trying to go to school. I don't know what the jurisdiction of the school police department is. I don't know what kind of authority they have. But if their authority is not far-reaching enough, then I think that it falls on this board to seek help from the other law enforcement agencies in town. I can't count how many times I have seen parents make an illegal U-turn just past the sign that says no U-turn in front of Spanish Springs Elementary School. I can't count. I can't count how many times I have had to pull my 4th grader back so that she doesn't get hit by a car because a parent is too busy talking to their kid, not looking where they're supposed to be looking. The red zones in front of Spanish Springs Elementary School are fading to the point that they're not even red. They're not enforced. Parents in the turnout, they pull in and they stop on the left side. The drop-off is on the right side. But they stop on the left because the drop-off on the right is full. And so it's just more convenient for them to stop in the red zone, have their kids jump out into traffic, and run across the drop-off. They park across the street. They get their kids out, and they just run across the street. They don't look for cars. There's, 100 feet away? There's a crosswalk, but it's too much for them to go to the crosswalk. The middle school and the high school kids, you've got them walking to school during commute time. Now, I don't know about any other school because I don't go to any other schools in any other areas. So when Spanish Springs High School and Shaw Middle School were built 20 some odd years ago, it was not like that out there. I don't know who projected the growth like that, but you have the kids walking in commute traffic. You guys got to do something to protect our kids.
Thank you, Ms. Proctor. I do want to assure you that this is top of mind for all of us. We've had many conversations at the board level about it. We've had conversations with both cities, the county, the Regional Transportation Commission, the Nevada Department of Transportation. It's something that we as a district are working on doing better at educating our students and drivers, everyone within our community, but that we really are calling out to everyone to make a change here. We need to be driving slower. We need to be more aware, less distracted when we're driving. It tears us apart that we're having this many accidents this year. I do feel confident that work is being done to improve things. The cities have been very responsive to us. We've had a number of meetings already to make some changes, and in fact, we have an unveiling tomorrow of a new crosswalk signal for one of the high schools that's going to make a huge difference there. So we have more work to do, but it is something that we are working hard to impact. And in fact, actually today, our Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is even acknowledging it at the federal level and making and doing work there to impact funding that could help us hopefully in the future to make all of our schools safer and this community. But it is a call to everyone to again, slow down and please be more aware when you're driving. Don't look at your devices and try to focus on what you're doing. So I do want to just take a minute. I know the zoning issues are complicated, and I just wanted to give our interim superintendent, Dr. Kristen McNeil, an opportunity to respond.
Absolutely. So first on the traffic, I just wanted to add our Safe and Healthy Schools Commission will be talking about this item as well at an upcoming agenda. But I also want to reiterate that our school police are at full staff and that they are working extremely hard to make sure that our school zones are safe. I know that our Chief Trevino and Chief Deputy Price actually brought an item to our Student Advisory Council as far as having students take some ownership on this as well. And so some ideas as far as some different types of marketing and getting the word out to our students that they have to take some of the responsibility on, but it is a community-wide issue, and so we need all drivers, walkers, pedestrians, to make sure that they're paying attention to their surroundings, because this cannot continue. It must stop. So thank you for that public comment. I truly appreciate the Reno Sparks Indian Colony coming and providing public comment around the rezoning of Corbett and Hidden Valley Elementary. I just want to go on the record that Connect Ed messages were sent, notices were sent, both at Hidden Valley and Corbett. We wanted to make sure that the Zoning Advisory Committee brought this forward to the Board of Trustees well in advance of the actual rezoning taking place, which doesn't take place until the 2021 school year. As well, I just want to put on the record that Corbett Elementary is a 4-star Title I school with a phenomenal teaching staff, a phenomenal support staff, and one of our most outstanding principals that has been recognized not only at the state level but as well as within her colleagues as well. So I feel very, very confident that any student at Corbett Elementary will be receiving a far superior education and that they are going to be doing wonderful things at Corbett Elementary. So thank you very much for your public comment. All right, I forgot that I'm in charge. So we'll move on to agenda item number 5, budget. This is a public hearing, discussion, and adoption of Washoe County School District Board Resolution 20-001, a resolution authorizing the issuance of up to $2,300,000 of general obligation medium-term bonds for the purpose of acquiring school buses and other support vehicles for the district, and directing the Chief Financial Officer to forward materials to the Department of Taxation of the State of Nevada. And this is for possible action. We have our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Mathers, here to tell us more.
Thank you, President Raymond, members of the board. Mark Mathers, Chief Financial Officer. Our fiscal year 20 budget does include approve our funding for $2.3 million of purchase of buses and white fleet vehicles. So this item will authorize a $2.3 million medium-term note that would be issued in the private markets to finance 14 buses and a number of white fleet vehicles. Those vehicles are listed under item 3.13. And so the action here today that we would ask you to take is, as the President noted, open the public hearing, then close the public hearing, open the public hearing, ask for any comments, then close the public hearing, and then take action to approve the resolution. And so the resolution would authorize myself to submit the financing documents to the Department of Taxation, and they would approve or disapprove the financing as opposed to the Debt Management Commission. So this will start the process, then we'll go to take bids, and then we'll bring back a resolution for adoption of the actual financing in approximately a month and a half.
All right, Trustee Holland.
Thank you, President Raymond. Mr. Mathers, if you could just for the public record explain why this goes to the Department of Taxation versus the Debt Management Commission.
Certainly, thank you. So state law allows for medium-term notes that have less than a 10-year term. And the process outlined in state law is to take any medium-term note application to the State Department of Taxation. Any debt longer than a 10-year term would go to the Debt Management Commission.
Thank you for that question. Are there any other questions for Mr. Mathers? I know there was a question that came up regarding both this item and the item on the consent agenda item, and that question and the answer have been logged on the with the meeting materials on our website. So there are. Oh yeah. Oh, I don't have that version. Oh wait, I do. Sorry. No, I don't. Okay. All right, so I would like to formally open the public hearing on the resolution. And are there any public comments? Okay, then I will close the public hearing and I will entertain a motion on
Move
this
for
agenda.
approval.
All right, I have a motion and a second.
Second.
Second from Trustee Cotto. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. This passes unanimously. Thank you. Oh, yeah. This is a different version. The president's version.
Do you want it?
That's okay.
No, it's important.
All right. This is working out the kinks. Okay, so we are moving on to agenda item 6.01, a presentation and discussion on the activities of the Education Alliance of Washoe County, including information on the annual Run for Education, Partners in Education program, Teachers Warehouse, and Principal for a Day. And we're joined by Kendall Inskip, the Executive Director, Brittany Haggerty, the Collaborative Coordinator, and Dave Bianchi, the President. And thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Happy New Year.
Yes,
For the
you
record,
too.
Kendall Inskip, Education Alliance. My sincerest thanks for the opportunity to present and update you on all the activities of the Education Alliance, which are laser focused on supporting our teachers, our principals, students, schools, and our district departments. So we are very fortunate to have a remarkable team, starting with a hardworking board of directors. And I'd like to introduce you to our president, Dave Bianchi. He's with Northwestern Mutual. And also recognize those in the audience. Our vice president is Dr. Melissa Burnham, UNR College of Education. Natha Anderson, president of the Washoe Education Association. Big claps for everyone here. Dr. Mariluz Garcia, director of the Dean's Future Scholars. Michelle Sanchez Bickley, who is the vice president of Human Resources at Renown Health. Dr. Melissa Dedmond, who is with TMCC Assessment and Planning. And I'm also very grateful to have the leadership of Deborah Beiersdorf on our board as well. And then next to me is Brittany Haggerty, our brilliant collaborative coordinator. Couldn't do it without them. Our mission directly aligns with Goal 3 of the district's strategic plan to engage family, staff, trustees, and community members in strong relationships that support student success. And really the key word here that defines Education Alliance is all about partnership. Because as you know, research shows that children are more likely to do well in school and in life if we, as community leaders, as parents, as family members, employers, teachers, and business share the responsibility for their success. That's why we're here. Education Alliance is the only organization that supports all schools, all principals, all educators of the district. There are other nonprofits and organizations that we help as well, but none of them support all of our students, schools, and departments. And today, we're going to outline how we embrace this concept of shared responsibility and collaboration in support of our beneficiaries, as shown up on this slide. So, first up, the Run for Education, supporting schools and students. This year will be our 15th year. I'm super excited to share an amazing sponsor thank you video and recognize the talented Jeff Voss, who's the Washoe County School District videographer. Jeff, thank you. You're going to be moved, I think, maybe to tears, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm always moved to tears when I see the kids. So a short video of the 2019 Run for Education.
I love seeing our community come together to support our students and our schools. It's such a great event.
Thanks for now. Thank you, Andy Energy. Thank you, Amplified Entertainment.
Panasonic's been supporting this great cause for the past 3 years, and we really look forward to many more years of partnering with the Ed Alliance.
Thank you, Jam Thank you, sponsors.
We know we're in desperate need for physical education in our schools, and this is one way for our community to say, let's make that happen for our kids.
Thank you to Van Wert Brigatti Architects.
Thanks, Atlantis.
Thank you, Nevada State.
Apartment Association. Thank you.
Corbett Element. Didn't Jeff do an amazing job? All that drone footage and everything. Thank you, Jeff. You know, as you know, the run promotes student physical health and connects families to schools and schools to communities. In your handouts, I know you have the statistics from the run. 8,000 attendees, 3,100 runners. Thank you, Kristen, for running. It's so much fun. 90 plus schools, which is a great record. 60 sponsors. But really the bottom line from the 2019 proceeds, 50 elementary schools and 1 middle school will receive Kids in Motion grants plus prizes for a total of $105,000, all going into our school. It says 47, but we didn't count the charters on that slide. So we do open it to the elementary charters under our district umbrella. So the total to date, grand total is $230,830. To our schools for PE, student wellness, and nutrition education. Oh yeah, the fancy. Right here is all of our sponsors, but really it shows the sheer number of sponsors, but my deepest gratitude really goes to the district departments who support the run: nutrition services, transportation, junior ROTC, school police, emergency management, and my thanks to the interim superintendent for committing buses for schools so that no family has a barrier to getting to the Run for Education. Save the date, October 18th, Sunday. It's usually the third Sunday in October, and I promise, I think I promised the weather will be beautiful. We'll see what we can do. Try 3 in the morning. It's much warmer at 7. Anyway, great time, and I appreciate all your support and being there and welcoming the families. It's a super cool day. So I also want to spend a few minutes sharing the impact of the Redfield Community Outreach Program, which is under our department. Thanks to the generosity of the Nell J. Redfield Foundation, Washoe County School District receives a grant of close to $300,000 for this program. It was piloted in 2013 at 4 high-needs schools, and now it's at 12 schools, 9 elementary and 3 middle schools. In collaboration with 50 external community partners, the program gets 6,300 students out of their zip code to experience educational field trips and in-class workshops. In its 6-year history, there have been more than 600,000 student interactions. We define those as enriching experiences on and off campus. These experiences have an academic focus, such as language arts, STEM, art, as well as tutoring and mentoring opportunities. And in many cases, these opportunities really are first-time experiences for our students. I'd like to recognize hardworking coordinators who are in the audience for the Redfield Community Outreach Program, Diane Longoria Howard, Lynn Arnone, and Juan Calderon Saldana, who was unable to be here tonight. But they support teachers by coordinating all logistics like meeting with grade level teams, arranging transportation, communicating with kitchen staff to let them know that their students won't be there at lunch today, clinical aides, and also working with these 50-plus community education partners in education. So it's a big load, but it gets kids out of their zip code many times when they don't have an opportunity. Teachers Warehouse. We love this picture. Teachers Warehouse has been around since 1988, if you can believe that. And teachers rely on the free supplies that are donated to the warehouse to provide their students really with the necessary items to enhance classroom learning. Nationally, the research shows that teachers spend about $480 out of their own pocket every single year on classroom supplies. So we feel that this is a really important resource for teachers, every teacher who teaches at the district and all educators, librarians included, and others. We have an average of 2,000 educators per year come visit the Teachers Warehouse, and they shop at least 3 times per year. And they also represent their entire school, so many times will shop on behalf of the school or a grade level and so forth. The warehouse is open year-round, except for at the end of June when we do inventory. And the in-kind value of the donations coming into the warehouse is about $100,000 per year. This is all supplies, classroom items, anything that teachers creatively can use in their classrooms. These are all goods, not cash. But I do want to thank the district for dedicating this space out on Edison. It's a very valued space for educators. We are actually, we host a couple of events at the warehouse. I know many of you have come to those events. They're super fun, designed to build awareness for both the community to bring donations, because not a lot of people know about it. We want to let them know that here's a place you can bring your old Christmas decorations or your office supplies, and teachers will do great things with them, but also build awareness within our teacher population, including new teachers. Last year's Community Donation Day yielded 32 pallets of donations, some brand new, valued at $50,000. So it's a great day to build awareness. And we are currently collaborating with the district and Washoe Education Association for this year's event, and we're trying to move it a little closer to the start of the school year when it's top of mind for people to donate things and backpacks and so forth. So another exciting activity that happened last year, Brittany's going to talk about it, the Outstanding Educator Awards.
So we are excited to share last year we received a donation of $15,000 from the Sean and Jennifer O'Neill Family Foundation, and that money was used to purchase highly requested supplies by teachers and to fund special teacher projects at 12 bubble schools. So we presented the awards at the Teacher Shop Till You Drop event, and the family was also there along with a representative from Senator Catherine Cortez Masto's office.
And just for everyone who might not know, a bubble school is a school that doesn't quite reach the number of students receiving free and reduced lunch to be a title school and receive extra funding, but has still a lot of needs at that level. So that's a great gap area to fill in.
Special. And then we're also pretty excited about Classroom Speakers. This is a new collaboration that we have going with the CTE department. It's a feeder to our Partners in Education program. And currently we have 113 speakers signed up from 33 different industries. So we'll be telling you more about that soon.
We definitely want to get that up to 2,000, right?
That's right.
Landon Miller, our board member, is spearheading that program. P16 Advocacy Council. We are at 42 members of this council, almost half from the private sector, 13 from higher education, UNR and TMCC, and the balance from the school district and city, state, county government entities. It is a deep collaboration and a long-time collaboration with UNR, TMCC, and the private sector working together to support the district and ultimately the students as they transition to higher ed, the military, and their careers. Since 1998, P16 is to produce the data profile, which tells the story of how students are performing as they move along the pathway up to higher education. And the data profile also serves as the source of key data indicators of the bridge between K-12, higher ed, and the workforce. And they're doing some good work on that. Another event that engages our principals and leaders with the community is our annual Principal for a Day coming right around the corner. Jeff Foss's brilliance strikes again in this short video highlighting this impactful event.
There's so many people here and so many leaders from the community that are interested in finding out what's actually happening behind the doors of a school building. I will continue to build our partnerships that we have started with Washoe County School Districts.
You know, you walk into classrooms and the students are actually engaged. It's really awesome to see that. I think Principal for a Day is awesome. I was a huge advocate of it when I got back to the office last year. I was like, you guys, this is great. You get to, like, you know, when's the last time you were in a high school, you know, walking around and visiting with kids?
This is our future. This is Northern Nevada's workforce in a couple of years.
We hope when they go in every classroom, they're going to see full engagement both by the students and the teachers. We do a lot of co-teaching here, so when we walk into those classrooms, we want them to notice the co-teaching that's taking place, the differentiating of instruction, the one-on-one attention that's given to students.
Well, I can only tell you that we've had a tremendous time today and the last several years that we've been doing the Principal for a Day. And it's amazing how much our community gives back to education. You know, we've been working with Wooster High since the whole partnership in education started in '88. You know, I graduated from Wooster in 1979, and it's a totally different school. The community's changed a lot since then, but that school has so many programs within the school, like so many different types of students go to school there. And she doesn't sit in her office, and she goes out there and works them. It just amazes me.
When people come as visitors, they are in awe of how we are a community, of how it feels good to walk in the doors here, about how we do give each other hugs and high fives. That feel-good part translates into how hard the teachers work for kids and the kids work for teachers, that mutual respect. I've never been more proud to be part of a community than I am of this school right here.
It's important that we're seeing what happens at the ground level and that the amazing work that's being done. It takes a special person to be in this industry, and I'm proud that we have 4 people in our family that have chosen this career path because the kids are much better off for it. You can just tell that they're not just students, they're family.
So it's been my privilege to be president of the board for the Education Alliance for the last couple of years and been on the board for several. I got involved in the Principal for a Day program several years ago and have been out 4 times. A couple of times I was really excited to be at schools like Bernice Matthews and Jerry Hall, both of whom are friends of mine, so it was neat to visit their schools. Of course, one of those happened to be my daughter as principal there that one time, so that was kind of fun. So in your handout that you have, there's a lot of numbers and statistics, but the really important reason for this event is really to engage and build awareness of the hard work of our education leaders and connect businesses and schools so that each of them can see what the others are doing and appreciate what they're doing. So it's really an opportunity to bring in business people, and in many cases, I'll talk about this more in a minute, create a partner in education, and a lot of principals can strengthen the relationship they already have with their existing partners in education. And so our staff really works hard at trying to match the principal, the school, and the business that's involved or the industry. A couple of examples of what has happened in the past. Hug High School asked for health sciences and was matched with the CEO of renowned South Meadows. Desert Heights is asked about construction and was matched with the Northern Nevada Sheet Metal Apprenticeship. Verdi wanted to have some media communications, and they ended up getting matched with an executive at Channel 2. And Didrikson asked for health sciences and got the TMCC Director of Nursing. So this is the kind of work that our staff does to try to bring and make this such an effective project. So there's great partnerships we have with the Reno Chamber of Commerce, Renown Health. And so what we do is the night before the event, we have a meet your match at the Chamber of Commerce, and we just kind of mingle. It's a casual atmosphere, and you get to meet and build those relationships. And so that's happening on February 7th at 5:30. And then the shadowing takes place the next day for a half a day. And once that's done, they come to Renown, and Renown provides a lunch in their MAC auditorium. So that's on the 8th. You all, as trustees, have hosted community leaders, and we appreciate that. We take advantage of this chance to impact the perceptions that people have and to educate any naysayers that are out there about the district and engage in building relationships with leaders in the county. So this is really important. And so if you can't spend the day, we hope at least you all can come Thursday night when we have that hosting of principals and community leaders. It's really an important opportunity. And I'd also like to congratulate and commend, again, the staff and the team for building super relationships with the movers and shakers in our county. The Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce, Renown Health, EDON, Rotary, Nevada, NV Energy, and so many companies, organizations that donate their time and money and expertise to help the Washoe County School District. It's just such a great project.
Dave, thank you so much. Kind words. I had a little bit of you have your postcards in your handouts, and those actually have the dates. I don't know why we're having issues with the remembering, but it's actually February 6th is the Thursday night meet your match at the Chamber. February 7th is a Friday. We make sure we celebrate big on that Friday for a special birthday. And we shadow, and then at lunch we'll do lunch at Renown Health. I want to thank Michelle for coordinating that lunch and our day in review. So again, if you can only plug in the night before or the day of, or if you want to go full on in and visit with a principal all day or with a community member, just let us know. We're happy to do that. I'm really bummed that we didn't remember the PI Champion Award. You know, we love acronyms in education. Partners in Education is PI. So we recognize outstanding partners and their school leaders at the Meet Your Match that night as well when we present the PI Champion Awards. I don't know if you can see it in this slide, but you can see the pie-shaped award. We decided we didn't want another plaque, we want another acrylic thing, which are all great, and I have quite some in my office, but we wanted to do something fun. People smile when they see this Pie Champion Award. And as you know, it takes two people to form a great partnership, and we are really thankful for our principals, our champion principals, who build and sustain relationships with their partners, who bring resources, including financial and in-kind, and people, volunteers, to help their schools. So that's why we recognize both the partner, the business or community leader, and the school principal, because they need to be thanked, and we're grateful for their time with this. And our goal really is to raise awareness of the importance and need for partners in education to support our schools. In fact, on Thursday, Brittany and I will be doing an interview live at Channel 8. I hate live interviews, but anyway, hopefully I won't stumble too bad, to promote the Pie Champion Awards and the Principal for a Day with our community. So just kind of concluding, I'd like to thank each of you for joining us at many of our relationship building activities. It makes an impact on our ability and our board's ability to secure resources. So when you're out there, it helps us to also secure resources, whether it's financial support, time, human resources, or in-kind treasures for our schools and departments. And I want to thank Scott. You designated Education Alliance as your birthday charity on Facebook, and I am so grateful. I just thought that was super creative, and every gift will go towards supporting our schools and teachers and principals, and what a great gesture, and we really appreciate it. Questions?
Great. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I think I can speak for all of us. We love you guys and the work you're doing. But I would like to open it up and see if anyone, my fellow trustees, would like to say anything specific. Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to really a kudos to the great work that you do in the Ed Alliance. I mean, the visibility, working really hard so that the vast majority, if not all of our schools, have partners and that those partnerships are active. And that's so you've really taken the program, a long way in the growth. I love seeing the growth in the Run for Education and the activities. I mean, kids go there and stay all day. It's just the growth in it, the involvement in it. I'm just really, really proud of the work that you're doing because it really helps our schools. It helps our schools, and it really is for the kids. So thank you for your work. Thank you for volunteering, Dave, for so long, and for the board that you lead. But it really adds a tremendous value to our district and to the work of our teachers for our students. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Angie.
I might add too at the run. I did see the interim superintendent out there in shorts and running the race. I didn't see any of the rest of you, but
in shorts.
Yeah, you missed me. I finished before her. So yeah, you missed me. Yeah. So yeah.
You won't guilt them into it. I've already tried.
You can walk too. We don't care.
Well, I just want to say for our executive leadership team and leadership team, how tremendously thankful we are that we have the Education Alliance and for all of the help and support that you provide our schools, whether it's for the Run for Educational, Principal for a Day, the Pie Warehouse. You all do a champion's job on serving for our students and our families. And so thank you from all of us for all of the work. And I know, Kendall, under your leadership as the Executive Director for Education Alliance, you have really steered this ship in the absolute right direction that it needed to go. So thank you so much. And I know you put in a lot of time because you're usually here after I leave. So thank you so much for what you do.
It's an honor to serve. Really,
thank you. Yeah, thank you all. And thank you to the phenomenal board that you've put together. I think that speaks a lot about how you've been able to make so many of those connections in the community and the work that they do to support not only you and the Education Alliance, but the entire district. I just can't speak highly enough of all the work, and love Principal for a half day. I have to say that's my favorite. I'm not a runner and don't really like being out in the morning in the cold, so I like Principal for the half day best. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
The next item on our agenda is 6.02, presentation and discussion of an update on Assembly Bill 168, which is AB 168, passed in the 2019 legislative session, demonstrably revising law associated with student discipline. This is for presentation and discussion only, and we are joined by Dr. Paula Marca, Chief Ombudsman and Strategies Officer, and our Director of Government Affairs, Lindsay Anderson.
Thank you very much, President Raymond, Vice President Dr. Taylor, all the board members. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, Paula Marca. You may recall that we had a presentation that we provided to you late in September where we kind of gave you a preview of the behavioral manual, and we also talked about some emerging legislation. And at that time, Dr. Taylor asked us to come back at a later point in time, share some data primarily around disproportionality. And so because of some of the reporting requirements in AB 168, we've kind of put this together. But the focus will be around the request from Dr. Taylor. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to start, and Lindsay's going to start us off. We're going to talk about the intent of the bill itself, AB 160A. We'll talk about some of the key changes that it brought. Just briefly, we'll review those again in case you have forgotten. We're going to kind of look at the impact of the law to date based on the first semester. We're going to review some disciplinary data, some trends relative to major behavioral events and suspensions, and then we're going to look very closely at some disproportionality, and then we'll talk a little bit about our district supports and the efforts that we're using to try and build capacity out in the field. So with that, we are going to talk about the intent and some of the changes, and I will turn it over to Ms. Anderson.
Hi, President Raymond and Dr. McNeil and the trustees. It is a little disorienting now that you've all sort of shuffled the deck, so I'll just try to maintain regular eye contact. Dr. LaMarca asked me to come and give a little bit of the, he's using the word intent. I would say what I have to say is a little more of the legislative history of sort of how this came to be, because this is a unique situation and a unique story, and so I think it provides a lot of context into why we are where we are today. So Assembly Bill 168 was introduced by Assemblyman Tyrone Thompson. It was a result of work he had done over the 2018 interim with the Clark County School District, My Brother's Keeper, and they had formed a juvenile justice working group over that interim to address issues around disproportionality, which I know we're going to talk about today. I think it's well documented that we are working through issues around disproportionality, particularly for boys of color, and that was something that Assemblyman Thompson was particularly passionate about. And so they worked for many months and had many events over that time and trying to figure out strategies at the district level in order to address that disproportionality. When the legislation was introduced, certainly there were concerns expressed from stakeholders, including us, around the original language of the legislation. So in normal Assemblyman Thompson fashion, he assembled a diverse working group. We got together in the kind of frantic nature of the legislative process. We had several meetings addressing some of those issues with the language before and after the initial hearings. That working group included the Clark County School District, representatives of My Brother's Keeper, the Superintendent's Association, the Clark County Association of School Administrators and Professional Technical Employees. So their principals and pro-techs are kind of in one bargaining unit. Representatives from the Washoe Education Association, the Nevada State Teachers Association, and Washoe County School District. The meetings were generally facilitated by Dr. Tammy Malich, who oversees a lot of this work in the Clark County School District and was really, I think, in this case, a primary author of the legislation. The work in the Clark County School District largely informed how the legislation was drafted. This may seem detailed, but just stick with me here. On May 2nd, there was a working group meeting scheduled, so we're mostly way through the legislative process. That was a Thursday. When we arrived, we were told that Assemblyman Thompson wasn't feeling well, and so we would go forward with the meeting, which we did, came up with some notes, and then Assemblyman Thompson passed away unexpectedly on May 4th. So the timing of that, I think, is just important for the context. You can imagine how everyone felt after that happened. There was a lot of confusion. What are we going to do now? Who's going to take the lead? It feels really uncomfortable changing words from a bill sponsor that is no longer there to be the arbiter of whether or not that is something he would have supported or not. So you can imagine how uncomfortable that was. There were more amendments made on the legislation. Ultimately, it was picked up by a member of the caucus very late in the legislative session. In fact, I pulled the minutes for the last hearing. It was on May 30th. And then obviously the bill was signed and approved very quickly, along with every other piece of legislation Assemblyman Thompson had sponsored. So sometimes the politics and the policy get lost in a process like that when there is an unusual tragic loss in that kind of situation. But I'm certainly empathetic to challenges in terms of implementation of legislation that's not clear. I basically think every piece of legislation is unclear and ambiguous, and we struggle through the implementation of lots of different pieces of legislation with very little guidance from, the state or any other body. So I think this is an instance where we've seen some things. We've heard from the field about the anxiety that this has caused. So I'm glad to be here today to support Dr. LaMarca's presentation. I don't think there's very much I can offer except to sit here and nod and be interested. But I will say that the Legislative Committee on Education, which is the Interim Education Committee, and you'll hear more about that at your next meeting from me, is taking up this issue on their April agenda. And so I do think that there is an opportunity to provide feedback from districts in terms of how it's been rolled out, what some of the concerns are, that certainly to put it on their radar, but in case that committee wants to sponsor a piece of legislation into the next legislative session to address some of the technical changes that I think school districts across the state may bring forward. So that's the legislative history, and I'm sorry that was long, but I think it's important to give context to sort of why we are where we are today. So I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to add just a little bit. I think, and it's in keeping with what Lindsay was saying, in front of you have some of the key changes that were brought through the bill. Limiting suspension was definitely sort of an emphasis of the bill. I believe it was an intent that excluding kids from instruction is counter and productive when you're trying to support learning. The fifth dash down as well, where it says consistency in behavioral expectations and consistency in enforcement. This is really all about that disproportionality piece, and we'll talk more about that. But when you have lots of suspension and exclusionary practices and it isn't being meted out equally or equitably, there's particular concern. Some of the other key changes to the bill, not necessarily associated with the intent, well, I shouldn't say it that way, are the introduction of restorative practices. This is something our district was already moving towards, but now this is mandated by law. Changes to what we called the big three. If you remember, the big three were possession of a weapon, distributing drugs, or selling drugs, and then battery on a staff member causing injury. There's also habitual discipline, which is kind of loosely associated with that. The law changed some of the rules associated with distribution, with battery, and with habitual discipline. And so when you have a first instant of that, the intent is to keep a student within their school, try and use restorative practices and behavioral planning to support them and change behavior before you would exclude them and move them to an alternative educational setting. There was also a significant change in the bill relative to students that are 10 years of age and younger. And really the bill basically says those students shouldn't be removed under any circumstance except for under extraordinary circumstances. And Chief Counsel Rombardo, myself, and others have asked what constitutes an extraordinary circumstance, and at this juncture, it's our responsibility to define that. It is not something that we did very frequently in the past. Very few kids age 10 and younger were ever moved to alternative educational settings. I think last year through a hearing process, and that's primarily what we were talking about, there were 3 students. There may have been 4 others that were moved at some point during the school year. That creates a particular problem. So when you're talking about taking a child, say a kindergartner or a first grader from an elementary school in which they're within a class of, say, 20, and then a school of 500, and then you move them into a classroom of their own. That's a very different educational environment and not probably appropriate developmentally. Okay. Did want to talk a little bit about tangible and perceptual impacts of the law. There is a general sense and feeling, I believe, that this law has made our schools less safe, that behavior is out of control as a result. And I think we have to work with staff around those perceptions. Perception is reality. And we do now have a law that does say that when a child batters a staff member and causes injury, that first time they do that, they're not leaving. That's a significant change, and that's going to prompt those perceptions. Those perceptions are real is part of what I'm trying to say. In actual practice, there has not been a huge impact from AB 168 in terms of students being removed from school. So in this fall semester, there were 31 behavioral hearings that were conducted. You have some of the data in front of you. 3 of those were for battery. 6 of those were for possession of weapons. 13 were for habitual discipline. There were no hearings for distribution of drugs. The other hearings were based on things like threats and violation of behavioral plans. Of those 31 hearings, 20 students were put into an alternative educational setting, and that's very consistent with the sort of rate from last couple of years. In fact, it's a little bit higher rate of removal. 11 students were not removed, and of those students, 3 of them may have been removed in the previous year had there not been a change from AB 168. One of those was a battery on a staff member, and 2 of those were for children that were younger than 10 years of age. So it's a real effect, but it's a relatively minor effect. Things are not that different today than they were a year ago. However, we intend to continue. We've been working with executive leadership with the WEA. We have visited school sites when they have concerns. We recently were able to, we were given the opportunity to talk to all of the building representatives about some of these concerns, and we intend to continue to do that. We in no way claim to believe we know what the solution to some of the problems are around violence and student behavior. We are working hard with our schools, and we're committed to that effort, and it needs to be a partnership. So let's talk a little bit about some of our behavior trends. And you've seen some of this previously, but I'm going to go ahead and walk through this again. And if I recall, this doesn't have a pointer, so I'm going to point. We do see an uptick in student behavior. And at the last presentation, I think in September, we did talk very specifically about violent student behavior. And we did see an uptick in the last 3 years within Washoe County around violent behaviors. That increase with staff as a victim has been pronounced. With student as a victim, it has not gone up. This captures all major behavioral events. There's like 57 different types of events that are included in this. That if you look at the middle school, the 3 bars in the middle, you are seeing that there were over 20,000 behavioral events in the 2018-19 school year. That involved somewhere around 6,100 different students. So behavior has been on the rise. And there is a real need to deal with that. For many major behavioral events, not all, we do, and in the past, have expected suspension to occur. Not always, but sometimes, especially when there's a pattern of behavior. This is trends with respect to suspension, and we also see that out-of-school suspension as well as in-school suspension. In-school suspension is basically when a child is removed from the classroom and they're put into a location within the school that's not their classroom. We see both in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension having been on the rise in the last several years. There's a little bit of a decline from 17-18 to 18-19 at the high school level in terms of out-of-school suspensions, and that's probably a good thing, but it's still, as you can see, there's a lot of suspension that is occurring. Suspension is lost instructional days. Kids can make up the work, but we really do believe, and sometimes they need to be removed from instruction, but we really do believe that teacher experience is super valuable for their learning. And so as much as we can, we need to keep them within the educational environment. All right. I believe all of you have seen tables of this nature. Yeah, you have all been here in the past. We use likelihood ratios to represent disproportionality. So basically how this works is if 5% of your population is made up of Native American students, your general student population is made up of Native American students, then proportionally, you would expect that 5% of the students that are in GT are made up of Native American students. 5% of the students that are going into AP courses are Native American students. 5% of the students playing sports are Native American students. 5% of the students involved in behavioral problems are Native American students. 5% of the students who are being suspended are Native American. So all things equal or proportional, you would expect that. And then if that were the case, then every value in this table would be a 1. So when you see a value that is under 1, you're seeing underrepresentation. When you see a value that's over 1, you're seeing overrepresentation. Okay? This table represents all majoral events and all suspensions. We're going to look at some very specific events in a moment. So, for example, if you look at IEP students, that's in the lower half of the table, you see that they are 1.4 times as likely, or 140% as likely, to be involved in a major disciplinary event than you would expect based on their percentage in the total population. They're suspended 2 times as likely than you'd expect given their percentage of the population. By contrast, if you look at GT students, they are underrepresented in terms of who's involved in majoral events. And one thing I need to point out about the suspension is every time you see suspension data, a major event has occurred. All right, so among GT students who have been involved in a major behavioral event, they are very underrepresented in terms of who gets suspended. Okay, that's an important kind of connection, and I'll touch on that more as we go. So I just want to make sure people are comfortable with the likelihood ratio, under and over representation. All right. I'm not going to go through all these graphs, but I am going to go through a couple of them because I think that they get at the intent of the legislation. So here we're looking at disproportionality. Again, we're using likelihood ratios. So if you look at the vertical axis, you see 0 to 7. Okay, we've got, this one is broken down by race ethnicity. So you have American Indians, Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, whites, multiracial, Pacific Islanders. And then below you see lines associated with different sorts of events. You see that red line that's horizontal at 1.0. That's just to orient you, that's proportional. So when you see a dot that's above, you have overrepresentation. A dot that's below, you have underrepresentation. So what we see here is that among American Indian students and among African American students, disproportionately, they're involved in battery, fighting, violence to staff, violence to students. We look at Asian students, and it's kind of the opposite. They're underrepresented in terms of these events. Okay, so now this next slide that I'm going to show you is suspensions for these same events. But remember, that's based on kids who've actually committed these behavioral infractions. So again, what we see is that African American students, so the yellow bar is violence to staff. So among students who are involved with violence to staff, they're 5 times as likely as you would think to be suspended. For violence to students, nearly 5 times as likely. For battery, nearly 4 times as likely. For fighting, nearly 3 times as likely. Fighting to me is a really interesting line to look at. So guidance in the school district for a long period of time has basically been, for lack of a better word, zero tolerance around fighting. If 2 kids get into a mutual fight, they should be suspended. That's kind of been the guidance. So with violence or with fighting, everything should be proportional. Anyone who's involved in fights should be suspended. So that one kind of begs the question of why are we seeing deviations around 1.0? Everything else, there are some different factors that might come into play. Let's look at our special populations and our IEP students. So they are 15 times as likely to be involved in events that involve violence to staff. 8 times as likely to be involved in events with violence to students. So you see the disproportionality. You can compare them to any of the other categories. We also see disproportionality relative to our foster students, relative to our students who are homeless. We have talked a little bit in here at times around the impacts of trauma and some of the other factors that create risk. There are factors that contribute to some of these behaviors. I do think that it's a very kind of theoretical argument or discussion that probably ought to be had at some point. To assume everything's going to be 1.0 is probably unreasonable. Okay, there's probably some range around a 1.0 that's acceptable. So there's some underrepresentation and there's some overrepresentation. But as soon as we get probably beyond 1.5, certainly at the 2 and above, we're talking about significant disproportionality. So again, this was involved in events, and then the next slide is just the corresponding suspensions. So this is part of the intent. I want to skip forward now. I know, I think a lot of our interest is around violence, but one of the factors that may be contributing to some of what we're seeing is what Ms. Young and others would call unconscious bias or implicit bias. Okay, and it's very difficult to measure to what extent that is a factor. So, for example, especially with a violent interaction, what you'll often hear is, well, there was violence and we had to deal with violence. But there's clearly some interpretation that's going on with respect to violence because everyone isn't being treated equally. But violence is more concrete, less ambiguous than certain categories. So I want to bring your attention, I believe it's slide 16 in your packet, and we'll walk through these really quick. So these are categories of events that we loosely include under what we call insubordination, events that have been coded by schools as students being defiant, students being disrespectful, students disregarding rules. Just to kind of get to the chase, those are very difficult things to define, and they're ambiguous. And so if there is something such as implicit bias that's affecting how we interpret, it's going to show up more when you have relatively ambiguous concepts. So again, here, if you look at African Americans, they're 3 times as likely to be involved in events that are categorized as disrespect. Nearly 2.5 times as likely to be involved in events that are referred to as defiant. Okay, Asians, far different sort of situation, and you can look at the other categories. A lot of this splits around poverty. So groups that are disproportionately living in poverty often tend to be disproportionately lacking access to critical programs and also disproportionately involved in behavior and discipline. This is the corresponding suspension data. So again, you're seeing that for kids involved in major events that have been categorized as disrespect or defiance, African American students are being suspended 3 times more often than you'd expect. Want to go forward and look at special populations. This one actually really concerns me again, especially with foster and CIT students. We know that these are kids. I should never say statement declarative statements like "we know." Data would bear out that the vast majority of kids that are in foster or in homeless living situations would come out on like an ACEs inventory, which is a trauma inventory, as highly impacted by trauma, most of whom are living in what's called complex trauma, which means every night they don't know what might happen. So these are kids who are going to have a difficult time complying at times. And so then when we see that they're involved in these events disproportionately, being involved in the event, you might actually understand. But then when you look at the suspension data and you see that they're being suspended, especially the CIT students, it's a real hard one. And there, again, I do want to say, there are times when suspension is appropriate and it has to occur. Okay, if a student is high on campus, they should not be in their classroom. They have to be removed in their classroom. Okay, if there is significant violence, at least at that point in time, there needs to be removal. We have to make sure that our environment is safe. But when we talk about longer term out of school suspensions, removal from that educational setting, that's particularly problematic. These kids by and large are already behind in learning. I'm not sure what kind of a environment we're putting them into. I tend to think our schools at times are the safest places possible. Okay. It's a fairly somber conversation, so I do apologize for that, but it is important that we look at our data regularly, and we will be giving you updates as we go. We share this information with schools. AB 168 does require some quarterly reporting where we are looking at school level suspensions and major events disaggregated by these groups. Principals are responsible for reviewing that data with staff, and you will receive periodic updates. It might not be quarterly unless you request it. You can have it as frequently as you like. So I do want to bring you back and remind you that we are trying to provide a lot of support for our schools, and we need to provide more support for our schools. You know, something in the earlier discussion from Education Alliance, Principal for a Day, we should all be teachers for a day and just live in their shoes to understand day in, day out, how difficult their jobs can be at times. We ask an incredible amount from our teachers. We are trying to build capacity so that they are more equipped. There are always going to be behavioral challenges. When you look at, for example, our MTSS triangle, sort of theoretically, it says that about 80 to 85% of the students, whether you're thinking about academics or behavior or attendance or social emotional learning, about 85% of your general population is going to be responsive. Then at Tier 2, about 10% of the students will respond to kind of interventions, but sort of small group sorts of interventions. There's likely to be about a 5% percentage of your population that is going to continue to be challenged, need very one-on-one sorts of interventions. So if you take a class of 20, then you are likely to have a student in a class of 20 who is going to require a lot of support. Okay? So our teachers deal with this every day, and that's important to keep in mind. We try to run all of our social emotional support, our attendance support, behavioral support through our MTSS, our multi-tiered system of supports, problem-solving framework. So you've heard of our tiered language before. So at the core level, these are broad categories, but these are things that are provided to schools and to teachers. Much of this is very connected. There is a lot that's expected of teachers. We do what we can to align these things. They do tend to weave together. They're certainly not inconsistent. But we are talking about support around classroom management, instructional practices aimed at inclusion, engagement, equity, and cultural competent practices, restorative practices. At this level, restorative practices might be some informal circles. You may have some familiarity with that. We have a bunch of family engagement strategies. You know, to have a strong relationship with the student, you probably need to have a strong relationship with the family. It's kind of hard to know a child without knowing their family. So all of this sort of fits together. Most kids are very responsive, okay? At the Tier 2 level, here's where we get into more small group interventions, small group instruction, social skills development. Restorative practices here might be more informal conferencing. This might be this kind of situation where a couple kids did get into a fight on the playground, and you've dealt with that, and then you bring them together and you do some conflict mediation or something similar to that. Behavioral management. As kids are not responding behaviorally to our expectations, when we know we've been clear about expectations and you know, taught all the routines, it might be time to do some, I wouldn't call it informal, but it's not super formal behavioral planning. We do things such as check in, check out. So a child who's maybe been in some trouble, every morning when they come in, we expect them to check in with a particular individual so that we kind of get a gauge of how their day is going. And then at the end of the day, they check out and how did your day go? And maybe there's differences in passing periods, or at lunch they're going to have lunch with a teacher or a counselor or with the principal as opposed to being in the big lunchroom. So there can be some informal behavioral planning that will occur at that Tier 2 level. Tier 3 is where we get very intensive. This is usually one-on-one or a very small group, very targeted, very specific. You do see functional behavioral assessment to develop behavior safety plans. This is the more formal process for identifying antecedent behaviors, things that may be triggering a child, what's motivating a child, so we can identify, you just can't say stop doing that. Typically a child is doing something to get something. So what we try and teach are ways to get that something more appropriately. So we have to be able to identify what that is. And so special education department is awesome. They do a very good job around functional behavioral assessment. Our MTSS group does as well. That's Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Building capacity, and this is it, and then we can take some questions if you have them. We have a lot of capacity building efforts that are going on. There's ongoing professional development across the board. We have cohorts of schools that have gone through PBIS training. There's PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, in every one of our buildings. It varies in terms of degree of implementation, but that exists in all of our buildings. Behavior management, that should have been 2 lines. We have behavioral health and management, where we're just providing support to schools, say, on cycle of defiance. So, kids tend to go through a cycle of defiance, and if you are an observer of that as a teacher or an administrator, and you can kind of back away from it, you sort of know the progression, you can best intervene, as opposed to being reactive. I mean, that's one of the things that we forget. Teachers are humans, principals are humans, kids are often in a very emotional state when they're acting the way they're acting. And if we're not careful, that's how we're going to react as well. And when you got 2 people who are interacting emotionally, we've all been there, and that doesn't usually go well. Yeah, exactly. Restorative practice, we're doing a ton of training on restorative practices. We just revised our seed grant. We're gonna scale up more quickly than we thought. We will hopefully train pretty extensively 80 school teams around some of the core restorative practices principles. We've already had 26 schools that have been a part of a cohort for 2 years. We're doing a very good job. The state offered to allow us to spend our own money to train the rest of the state, so that's how good we're doing. And that's kind of, yeah. Could you work on that for us? Trauma-informed practices. This one is really something I'm very passionate about. We've got the Handle with Care bill that's coming, but we are going to start doing more and more support for our schools around trauma, what that means. And this is not a special new thing. This is an opportunity for us to weave together equity, to weave together our restorative practices, to weave together SEL, pay attention to adults, there's secondary trauma, family engagement strategies, putting them all together so people kind of understand the best ways to support kids. We have a lot of kids that are experiencing trauma, and it's affecting their learning. And traditional disciplinary practices are not helping that. Outreach efforts, ongoing collaboration with the Washoe Education Association. Again, I mentioned a couple meetings. that we've been a part of, several school meetings and their recent meeting, and we hope to work with them on an ongoing basis, networking with partners. We have partners at the university, several different groups. I've listed one. The Family Stability Project, that's really a project that's being facilitated by the food bank, but at the table of that particular project is Children's Cabinet, communities and schools, a couple of state agencies, Human Services Agency, we're there as well. We partner with Children's Cabinet, we partner with JTNN, Juvenile Services. We're doing what we can. We see this as community issues, not just school issues, but we are community hubs. Our schools are community hubs. The kids are with us so for such a significant period of time, as are their families. We have responsibility. We can't ignore it because they're going to be at our schools. Steering efforts. Very appreciate Dr. McNeil in the Pathway to Positive Progress. We're spearheaded a school climate student behavior task force. That's a very eclectic group, has parents, has teachers, has principals, has central office administrators. Dr. McNeil has attended as well on several of the meetings. We just had a meeting last night. It was particularly productive. That will continue. That group is almost more of a steering group. We're really trying to move in a direction of helping us shape the best guidance for schools, teachers, and administrators. And then we're going to continue to work with the state regarding the statute and on their guidance and regulation. So that's the presentation. It's probably a little more than you wanted, but we felt like we had you and you're a captive audience, so we were going to give it to you. So any questions?
Well, thank you. That is a very sobering and somber presentation, but I appreciate your giving us the facts and hope we can all, find a way to make some changes here. So I'll let my fellow trustees have a moment to talk, and then I know we do have some public comment. Trustee Simon Holland.
Thank you, Vice President, President Raymond. Very disturbing. I think we're all very disturbed, and I'm hopeful that providing the information on a school-based report will help people to really own what do I need to be doing differently. I appreciate the great work, and I appreciate all of the strategies that are being provided to help us address this. The increase in the events is really dramatic, and that's really distressing. And then the disproportionality is just very troubling. Have you all talked about an action plan for how to help support schools in reviewing the data and having the conversations about the data and then developing action plans for the data at the school level?
We have, and we can do a better job with that. We do, on about every 6-week basis, we meet with, it's primarily assistant principals and deans who are in charge of discipline in our schools. But we bring them together. We always review data at those meetings. We always provide hints for the best ways to share that information. We can improve on how we do that. Some of this information that you're seeing in this particular format, this is really the second iteration of that, so it's a fairly newer and I hope fairly interpretable graphs, and we think that'll be helpful. It is difficult conversations within the school. I mean, the data is one thing, and I don't think people are shocked out in the field that there's disproportionality, and they know behavior's on the uprise. So the data is a critical piece because you got to know where you're at. But it really is going to come down to sort of those professional learning community conversations that connect some of this to student learning. And what are our strategies? How are we including students? Some of the books around behavior they seem simplistic, but they really make some sense, at least to someone like me. We teach math. we will often try and reteach a concept 7-10 times before we expect kids to master it, but we expect compliance with behavior. And so really building routines and going through what that is for significant periods of time and then repeating it often with students is very helpful. So there are things that we need to do to strengthen the support to schools.
If I could just ask a follow-up question. I don't want to imply that I think anybody is intentionally, avoiding. I mean, we're all out in schools and we see the difficulties that educators are facing. I was in a school yesterday where they can't have any chairs in the room and they can't have anything on the tables in an elementary school because a child in the school, in that classroom, every day will throw every chair at everyone else in the room and remove everything from the table. And this is in a classroom of, 28, 30 kids. So all those other children are affected by it and the teachers are affected by it. So I honor and absolutely appreciate and am in pain and feel for the educators that are dealing with this. And I'm wondering if we're drilling down into the information enough to say, so there's a high proportion of, for example, foster kids at this school, but they have a lower incidence of disproportionality than we might expect, and maybe to have them be able to help identify what are we doing that's helping and be able to share that with others. I don't know if we've gone that far with the data yet.
We have not gotten to that point yet. It is where we definitely intend to go. Let me just comment really quickly. Yesterday, the work with the steering committee really revolved around 5 things. And it's one of the things you brought up. This comes up at every meeting, sort of the rights of the one versus the rights of all. And it's kind of a rhetorical question, right? It's not clear cut. You can't say, how many times something has to happen for something to change. But we got to get our head around that because it's a real issue. We did talk significantly about consistency from classroom to classroom in terms of expectations, and then consistency from classroom to school. Tied to that, and that's a controversial conversation because teachers need to have latitude. We tell them to differentiate, and then you tell them to be consistent. I mean, which do you want? So it's a hard job again, but it's critical that some of those expectations, those behavioral expectations, are consistent. Because kids, if Miss Anderson treats Paul one way and then Paul treats Paul a different way, Paul doesn't know what's going on. Roles. What's the role of the teacher within the classroom in terms of discipline and behavioral support? What's the role of administration? That's a tension point we're working on. Supports, centrally and within the building. How do we support? And this is one of to your point about using other schools as models. How are we supporting teachers with best practices? How are we supporting administrators? We have to get that. The last thing, and this is part of the law too, it's kind of embedded in the law. It's not explicit. It's transitions. One of the things that I think we lose sight of because we get so exasperated at times with problems is when these kids are excluded, whether it be for 3 days within the school, 3 days outside of the school, or for 45 days at Inspire, they're coming back. They are entitled to a public education in their zone school unless there's extreme circumstances that require a different setting, which is typically just a different traditional school, long term. So what are we doing when they're out to transition and then reintegrate them? And that's where the restorative practices is really critical. Restorative practices is about building community, and then when there's a breach, restoring to community. So we are working on that. We're trying to use data to get to these sorts of things. It's a work in progress.
Go to Trustee Cottle. I saw your light next, and then Trustee Calvert, and then Dr. Taylor, Vice President Taylor.
It's just similar to what Trustee Simon Holland had said. Classrooms are full of 25, 30 students, and at what point, I know we taking a student out of the classroom isn't ever going to be good, but at what point is the educational environment of all of those other students have to be taken into account? similar to what was said about the student that throws the chairs. Because that's what I hear from parents is, I get it, but my kid deserves an education too, and my kid can't concentrate in class. The teacher doesn't give attention because they're dealing with the problem every single day, and that it drives the teachers crazy, it drives other students crazy, and it can hurt performance. So at what point do we have to look at the classroom like this is either not a good fit, what's going on, versus, well, we just have to do whatever we can to keep that child in that classroom because the law tells us we have to?
That's a very difficult question, and it is related to what Member Holland asked. You know, there are various junctures along the way. So on any given day, a teacher does have the ability to temporarily remove a child from a classroom. We hope that they've exhausted really all that they can do before they move to that particular mechanism. At that particular stage, that's what you're asking is part of what the discipline committee at the school site has to think through, and that's led by the principal. So if a child is removed temporarily within the school, there's a 3-day window in which there has to be a conference with the parent. The rules have to be discussed with parent and student. There has to be sort of acknowledgement of wrongdoing and how we can get better. Principal has to make a decision. Does that child go back into that classroom, or is there an alternative that I can choose for that? Principals have very few degrees of freedom. I mean, especially the smaller the school. If you've got 2 fifth grade classrooms or 2 third grade classrooms, you might be able to make a change once, and then you've kind of exhausted your options in terms of within the school changes. If things continue to escalate, that's maybe where it comes to us as a habitual discipline problem. And again, the law does say you put them back. But as we go through that process and we look at all the extenuating circumstances, a decision could be made that that child needs a different environment, whether it be a different traditional school or an alternative setting for a period of time. So there's no easy answer, I guess is the point. It's a case-by-case situation. There are significant restrictions relative to with students with disabilities who have individualized education plans. IDEA provides some restrictions and limitations that are a bit different than for general education students. Those have to be weighed, but there have been times when a situation rises to the level where we feel strongly that safety and health is impacted and decisions are made. It's case by case. There's no real clear formula for it, at least at this point.
Thank you. Trustee Calvert, do you still have? Okay. Vice President Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would say, I guess a couple of things. First of all, thank you for bringing this information back. I think us being able to have a look at the disproportionality just gives us a better look at why the equity work that's being done in the district is so important. Yeah. I think all of us share the safety concerns and the classroom management concerns for our teachers, and how that may impact the educational opportunities for all students. You started the presentation talking about the new legislation and how it really hasn't had, numerically at this point anyway, a significant impact on the numbers in terms of how students would have been treated in various situations, and that's good to hear, because we don't want to send a message to our teachers that nobody, even though it's the law, well, no one cares if you're safe, so it really hasn't had a significant impact. And so I appreciate the work that you're sharing that has to continually done to share that information with the teachers, because how they feel in terms of them being supported in those difficult situations that come up, it's important. What I hear often is certainly some of that, but remember, in my district goes from Hug High School to McQueen High School, so I have a pretty big range. And actually what I hear more of is about the disproportionality, and my kid can do the same thing another kid can do, which is still not okay for my kid to do it, but why does this happen to this kid and then my kid does this? I hear that much more often, and I have a pretty wide range. when you look at the population and the demographics of the district that I have. And so I think that that's a bigger challenge for us, not because the safety of teachers doesn't matter, because it does. But looking at these numbers and the trends that you've shared hasn't had that large of an impact. This is a bigger challenge for us, is how do we make sure every child, is given the same opportunity, regardless whether they're a great student or whether they're a student that has some behavior issues across the board. How do we make sure, and then some kids, as you said, need to be removed, and when you need to be removed, you need to be removed. But what's showing us this is that there are some students, whether it's ethnicity or whether it's class or whether it's whatever the case may be, a disability, whether you're in transition, some students for the same infraction have a significant difference and therefore impact on their educational opportunities. That's, to me, that's the saddest part of what I'm hearing, because we didn't hear the behavior is going up. But what's supposed to happen to the students isn't changing as much. So we haven't had more of an impact on our teachers. So we have to continue that work, because we don't want to leave the teachers out there. But the thing that the flashing light to me is, wow, how do we tell those students and those families that you're just as important? Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, that's what saddens me, is how do we do that for those kids? And in many cases, those are the kids that are most vulnerable and that have a lot of the trauma and the other challenges to deal with. And then you come to school and you get more of that. Yep. That's what's sad to me. That's and I don't have an answer. And I know you're working really hard. And I know Tiffany's office is the equity office. They do a tremendous job. The trainings, they do a great job, and they're getting to people as fast as they can. Right. I love to see some of the impact of that, and if we're moving the needle in terms of, equipping teachers, those things that we can do to equip teachers, educators, I should say, because it isn't just teachers, it's everybody in the buildings, right? Mm-hmm. All of us on how do we mitigate some of those things. So this kid who's a child in transition, for whatever the reason may be, how do I mitigate that in terms of my own things, right? Because that child deserves the same opportunities as this other child.
I'd like to comment just briefly. Restorative practices is misunderstood. Restorative practices is not well researched. I'm not going to sit here and say it's a panacea. It's not, and so far we haven't found any. But it's misunderstood. People think it's about being easy on offenders. Restorative practices is principally about building a community. It is for the whole. So in terms of the rights of the one versus the whole, restorative practices is leaning towards the whole. It's building a strong community and then repairing that community when harm has occurred. And there's nothing you're going to find anywhere within restorative justice kind of theory or work that's going to suggest that there shouldn't be consequences. There are always consequences. They may be agreed to, and they may be sort of emerged from a conversation, but it's about repairing harm. The restorative practices work, and Tiffany is one of now 12 super trainers within our district. She's been trained through IIRP, through Trish's group as well. That, as well as kind of matching that with some of the PBIS work, yes.
Would you go a little bit into what the training is that Tiffany, as well as the rest of your staff, went through?
Sure.
A little bit.
So, I will. I'll back up to that. I just want to say that the other side of that is the work around positive behavioral intervention supports, because having those very clear expectations that would help sort of move out some of that bias that might be involved in what we expect is how we get there. So we have contracted with a group called the International Institute of Restorative Practices, IIRP. They're renowned. They trained a cadre just recently of 12 of our folks, and that's paid for through SEED. Our folks will now be able to train, but we're also bringing in IIRP to train all of our school teams. But that's really walking through the continuum of supports that makes up restorative practices. So it's really starting at that kind of very informal Tier 1 level, things such as circles, where kids are getting introduced to one another. It's great ways to start the year. The use of effective language, other things that are just really good ways to help build climate community. It's very much aligned with a lot of our SEL work. Then they move into sort of the informal conferencing where you're really facilitating when harm has occurred, but it's not such egregious harm that it needs to be super formal, all the way to the point where they're being trained on how they would facilitate a conference that might involve, say, a teacher who's been harmed, a student who did the harming, parents of the student, family members of the teacher, all getting a say, and they would be trained in how you facilitate that sort of a thing. We think it'll be very valuable, and it's a commitment for a couple of years to really get the training out, and then depending on what the seed grant does after that, we may see a continuation of that.
Do you very briefly, if you feel comfortable, talking a little bit about the training and the symposium that we're planning for April 24th, 25th?
Sure.
Some brief details.
Sure. So this is a little bit more associated with Hannah Care and trauma-informed practice. I worked with Dr. McNeil. We originally wanted to do a training at the end of January. We postponed that. We now are going to have it's integrated trauma-informed practices training. Restorative practices will be part of that. SEL will be part of that. Equity and diversity is part of that. It's going to occur on April 25th, which is a Saturday. It'll also combine with it a strong emphasis around mental health. That's one of the issues that we haven't talked about in here. A lot of kids, a lot of families, a lot of us have mental health needs, and there's very few supports in our community. So we are working with Human Services, we're working with Judge Liu and family courts, we're working with Juvenile Services, we're working with Children's Cabinet, community and schools. They're all partnering with us with this event. It's going to be really a cool thing if we can pull it off. We provided all of our schools, I think, a very good resource, 2 LTLs, 2 Lead Teach Learn meetings ago, a book called Trauma Sensitive Classrooms, and the author of that book will be providing keynotes to all of our administrators on the 24th, and then she'll also be kicking off the day on the 25th. And once we have the day more sort of mapped out, we will make sure that you all are invited and that you can come and enjoy the day. It'll be good. Hopefully there'll be school teams, 3 to 4 people from every school.
Great. Trustee Minetto?
Thank you for this work. Over my 29 years in the district, I did see behavior deteriorating. I don't know how else to say it. It was like spiraling down. And what Trustee Katie said, I can't think of anything today. There's a lot of that going on, and the teachers are suffering from PTSD. Those other kids in that classroom have to be suffering from PTSD. This is real, and we're not preparing that child for real life. And I don't know what the answer is, but if we get together and we talk and it's good. I mean, I'm not saying that's not good, and you're saying that, but there's a time. But I don't know if people know what that time is without it ending up like that, where the teacher goes home every day crying. Those kids go home to their parents crying because they're not learning anything, and that's not the way school's supposed to be.
Thank you. And our student representative, Mr. Noble.
Well, that was a very sobering presentation, Dr. Lamarca. But I think actually the most concerning aspect for me in particular was the insubordination inequity numbers, because I think out of all of them, that seems like the most subjective one. And if the most subjective one shows some of the greatest variability, well, we may have a problem. And so thank you for your presentation and your continued work on this issue. And that in particular was very disturbing. Thank you.
Trustee Kelly?
Thank you, Madam President. I mean, this has been a great discussion, a lot of good information. The information that's here hearing my fellow trustees, and of course your explanations and the background that you've been sharing. So I've been trying to think if there's some other bit of information that I would like to know. And I think what I would like to know, and I don't know if it's even possible to get this information, but I would like to know quantifying what's the academic performance or degradation of a classroom. So at the classroom level, where there's issues for one or more students. And I know that can be tough because, I mean, you might have 2 fourth grade classrooms with 25 students each, even at the same school, but they're still going to be different classrooms, right? They have different students, different teachers, the students are from different backgrounds. But I would still be interested to know, can we look at several classrooms that are about as close as we can, that are similar, and if one classroom has had over the school year, 3 or 4 instances of violence, or the student had to be removed or whatever, and then you have another classroom that had over the same period 10 or 12 instances of the same kind of infractions, is there an academic drop in the classroom that had much more infractions compared to the classroom that only had a few? I don't know if that's possible to determine, but it's something I would like to know, not more at the classroom level, because that might inform, if we had classrooms that both had 10 infractions, but one of them there was no academic drop, and the other one there was a big drop, maybe we could look at that classroom that had no drop and see what did the teacher do, and maybe that's something that we can share with other classrooms or other teachers. So.
Thank you for that question. That's a really good question. I will work with Mr. Hayes. I think that there's ways it would be a quasi-experimental kind of a study. I think there's some things that we can do where we can begin to get at that. One thing, though, that I'll just say kind of to foreshadow is, you've heard me say before that the school climate work and the learning work, they're part and parcel. It's all one. So what will be difficult, and we can do some of the comparison work that you're referring to, but it could be that instructional practice is contributing to behavior. It's not just behavior contributes to learning. So we'll have to tease that apart carefully. I think that your basic hypothesis would probably be borne out, that when we see more violence within a classroom, you're going to see lesser academic performance. But it's then figuring out what's really causing that. That's going to be the difficult part. Yeah. Excuse me.
Dr. McNeil. Well, first of all, I want to thank Lindsay and Dr. LaMarca for bringing this forward. The first time that we actually reviewed this data was in our equity and diversity leadership team meeting. And Nathan, the very first slide that we started talking about was slide 16, because that is a concern. It is an absolute high-level concern. But we're not going to be able to get to the issue unless we take a look at the data. And so I'm thankful to the board that we brought this forward. I know that Dr. LaMarca has plans to be sharing this data out. We're going to be taking it to the Safe and Healthy Schools Commission. He is going to be presenting it at the behavior meetings. I know that OSL has had this presentation, Office of School Leadership. But the tie to student academic engagement should not be underlooked or underestimated. The tie to student academic engagement is huge. And so we have to be able to develop a strategy, a course of action, plans to make sure that our teachers and our administrators are supported at the classroom level around what that academic engagement looks like. And we have plans, but I will just say very shortly, it is a resource issue, and it continues to be a resource issue. When we talk about mental health, when we talk about children in poverty, complex trauma, we know that this is a resource issue within our school district as well as in the state of Nevada and across the country. So I'm just going to put that out there. But I truly commend all of the work of Dr. LaMarca's staff, our area superintendents. I'm extremely impressed with some of the ideas and concepts that are coming up around removing barriers so that our teachers and our principals can get the help that they need in that classroom and the training. So thank you.
Trustee Simon Holland.
Just wanted to add
Be so
one
hard
other
to spit
thing.
that out.
One of the things that I saw in place in some of the schools I visited this week that have some behavioral issues were the safe school professionals. And that seems to be just a huge asset. And I don't know what the source of funding is. I know that some of the schools that got them were Title I schools that the principal made a decision to fund it. But maybe you could talk about that, Dr. McNeil, because that, and every school where I saw them, they were working with a kid, it was calm, lots of good work going on with those people, and they seem to be younger, very enthusiastic. So if you could just highlight that.
And if Dr. Lamarca wants to add, the Safe Schools Professional is actually a separate grant, and we were very fortunate through this last legislative session as well as the one before that is grant funded. Those positions are grant funded. We contract. We work with communities and schools. We work with several different entities in order to get those Safe Schools Professionals. But you are right. I mean, they are amazing, and the best part is that they work in sync with our school counselors.
Right.
They work in sync with our school counselors. So. Yes, it would. Yeah.
All right, before we wrap up, I know we do have public comment.
Can I just add really quick to
sorry.
finish that
I'm sorry.
conversation and also to justify my existence in sitting here? Yesterday, Catherine Loudon was asked to present to the Washoe County Behavioral Health Policy Board, which is chaired by Senator Ratty, to talk about safe schools professionals and you know their role in what's happening. This policy board asked her to come. They said, we knew things were happening, but we don't know what exactly. And I walked out of that room feeling like we had built a coalition of partners on the outside. There's private and public sector representatives as part of that policy board saying, and Catherine did a great job of outlining how great it is and what some of the barriers are for sort of full implementation and some of the restrictions that are happening at the state level that are making it challenging to fill those positions. With a team of lobbyists to say, this is the most important work we could be doing. Wow. So I felt like the community support at that level for Safe Schools Professionals was like about the easiest pitch I've ever heard.
That's great.
So I think we're going to have a coalition of people who believe in that spending to try to make that a substantial investment in our schools.
Thank you. All right, public comment.
Netha Anderson.
Natha Anderson, Washoe Education Association. Thank you, President Raymond, for this opportunity to bring up some points. First, I wanted to thank Dr. Paul Lamarca, Dr. Troy Parks, and Area Superintendent Jen Van Tress. They were the ones that were in front of the firing squad at the building rep meeting last week. It was about 45 minutes, 50 minutes of a presentation, and then also very specific issues that were coming up at our school sites. And so I really appreciated them being there. But one thing that was very clear that was coming out, there was a few things. First, people do not feel safe in our schools. You brought this up already, so I don't need to bring it up again. The level of disruptions are definitely impacting our learning, because what was stated, I believe, by Trustee Cottle, how do we make the decision as to this child who's very important and is the one that we're unable to have desks or chairs in our classrooms? This child matters, but so do the other 28 students who are learning how to be a student as a first grader. There are so many programs. And one thing also that after talking with the building reps a little bit later, our principals' hands are being tied. It's not only the teacher in the classroom, many of our principals don't know what to do. They are, instead of being able to be the administrator to do an evaluation, they are literally with a student in the morning for 4 hours and a different student in the afternoon. And they know that they're supposed to be coming in to evaluate us as educators, but they're unable to do that because to do so means that a student could be harming others. And so I appreciate the fact that you're looking at this. Finally, Dr. McNeil's point, I'm going to actually just state it. We don't have enough money. The training that is necessary for us to be able to do any of these programs, it's not present. It's wonderful that we've got 12 super trainers in this program, but when you've got 4,000 educators alone, not even all not even all employees, because our support professionals are also being hurt. And I know that I'm here representing the teachers and counselors and speech language pathologists, but they're our brothers and sisters too. And we can't do our job without our special education aides. And they are the ones that are being hurt. And they are the ones that are going home with bruises and broken bones. I also really respect the idea of doing this April 25th training. My only concern is we're trying to do every single thing, and that's one of the hard things for us. We do so many things that then we're unable to do one thing right. And I want to bring that up, is that there's so many trainings that we have, there's so many programs. Which one are we supposed to be perfecting? Thank you again, though, to Dr. LaMarca and everybody else involved.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
John Eppolito.
John Eppolito, Protect Nevada Children. One other thing to consider with the all the stuff that was presented is the record that stays with these kids forever. Anytime there's a discipline issue, a minor discipline, a suspension, anything entered in the multi-tiered system of support, that data lives in Infinite Campus forever. So now we just learned it's the Black, Brown, and American Indian kids who this is going to affect the most. What Don Gallimore is very well aware of, Lonnie Feemster is very well aware of. We used to get so aggravated with Tracy Davis because she didn't seem to care. But that's who's getting impacted the most. That data never goes away. It's an Infinite Campus, and then the most sensitive data, all that stuff I just mentioned, also goes to SANE and never goes away. The state system. We don't know how that is going to affect the future of these kids. Here's what we do know. You guys are adding to it by using Class Dojo, because that's a behavior modification, and teachers and people at the school are entering subjective data about students. We don't know when they're going to have a data breach. We don't know how that data is going to affect the kids. What we do know is approximately 12 kids have had their admissions to Harvard rescinded because of stuff they've posted online. They're 18-year-old bright kids that got into Harvard that didn't go to Harvard because of something they posted. That we know. That's the tip of the iceberg. And I know some of this is above and beyond what you guys have control over, but you do let the schools use Class Dojo. That should be gotten rid of immediately. My son, last year at Columbia, before the interim superintendent helped us, he had a lot of problems in 7th, 8th grade, maybe starting, 7th and 8th grade. I don't know if all that stuff was documented, if he would be graduating Columbia this year. We don't know what's happening, and it would be nice if I had some help from you people. You are the ones that could make a difference. I had a little help at the legislature. You guys killed it, though, at least the school district. Khan Academy. Why do my kids have to spend 2 hours a day on Khan Academy? Geometry, honors geometry. Everybody gets an A in honors geometry. It's ridiculous. My daughter doesn't deserve an A in honors geometry, but she's going to get one because it's all online. It's stupid. It's crazy. Nick Polikitis, these kids starting on devices in kindergarten. I have a client right now who's concerned about his daughter. She's at Nick Polikitis. They understand all the device that they're using. They're concerned about her reading. You guys remember when I brought you that report 6-8 months ago that said kids that start using devices are going to be a year behind in reading by 4th grade if they're using devices all the time? I haven't had the heart to I'm trying to sell his house, so I haven't brought this stuff up yet. If these inspections go good this week, I'll bring it up to him. But you guys, it's frustrating because you guys know what's going on, and it seems like you don't do anything. Protect Nevada Children. You can find us on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eppolito.
That's all I have for this item.
Well, I'd just like to thank you both, Dr. LaMarca, for all the data, and Lindsay for giving us that important background on the bill and kind of how we got to where we are. I would just say for me that one challenge with this is in a way these are very intertwined, but they're also kind of two separate issues. We clearly have to figure out a way to better manage these issues in the classroom that are impacting our teachers. And we have a really significant issue around disproportionality, and it's clearly mirrored in other areas. This is the behavior disproportionality, but it's the same lines when you look at the AP enrollment and the other things. And so I do feel, and I'm glad that Vice President Taylor mentioned it too, that we have to keep pushing with our equity training and the SEL work that we're doing around that too. And so I'm really glad that we have a presentation coming up, and I think in a meeting in February that we'll kind of talk more.
I think.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of hear more at that time about the work that we're doing and continuing to do in our schools and classrooms to help change those disproportionality numbers too. So thank you very much. We will take a 10-minute recess and come back for the last 2 agenda items.
We have a recess.
All right, we will call the meeting back to order. And we're moving on to agenda item 6.03, presentation and discussion on employee incentive programs created through legislative action since 2007. And we are joined by Emily Ellison, our Chief Human Resources Officer, for this presentation.
Yes, and I know that I stand between some of you and a basketball game, so I will talk fast. All right, so we wanted to provide an overview of the incentive programs that are available to employees because we get questions about them periodically, and we also thought this was good information to provide. So if you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to stop me. But as is mentioned in the agenda item, all but one of these programs are created through legislative action, and we also felt like it was really important to convey not only to the trustees, but now that we have it all in one place, we can convey to staff as well, kind of the boundaries within which we have to work in implementing these incentive programs. And so that's the first slide here where we talk about those boundaries or program considerations, right? So in many of the situations or programs that we'll talk about, there are compliance requirements outlined in statute or regulation. So perhaps the money is designated during a legislative session, and then the Department of Education is tasked with rolling those funds out to districts, and so then they implement through regulation additional requirements that the district must follow in distributing those funds to staff. So that's obviously an important consideration. Financial constraints, we of course must remain within budget, and so that certainly comes into play when we're talking about the criteria for different incentives. If it's not legislatively mandated, then what parameters do we have to work in to make sure that we stay on budget? We've also tried where we had latitude to create the criteria or add to the criteria to focus on areas of particular need. So providing incentives for new hires and providing incentives for special education or to incentivize desired behavior. So you'll see that some criteria includes like attendance requirements, for example. And then we also wanted to, when we do have the latitude to add to the program requirements, to provide options at various stages of employment, right? So as is the case in many legislative sessions, a flurry of activity might happen around a particular area of need. So in the 2015 session, our district and all of the districts in the state, including Clark, had a significant teacher shortage. I think that was the year that I started, and they were short like 1,800 teachers or something, right, going into that legislative session. And so obviously there was a lot of activity and conversation around how from the state level can we support districts in meeting that need. But we also feel like it's important, and that kind of speaks to the next bullet, to try to attempt to mitigate unintended consequences, right? So when you're flooding all of the funds or programs into new hires, for example, rightfully so, teachers who have been here more than 1 year say, well, what about me, right? I'm dedicated to this work too. And you'll see that even during the last legislative session, some additional money was earmarked to help resolve this problem as it related to an incentive around Title I transfers and incentivizing that behavior. So I did want to put on here that this document is not final guidance to employees because there are a couple of incentives that we will talk about tonight where the final eligibility criteria has not been provided by the Department of Education yet. And so when it comes to employees using this information to determine their eligibility for payout, I want to put the disclaimer out there that this is the information we have as of today, and guidance will be forthcoming to the specific employees in the future. So there are a number of incentive programs that we'll cover tonight. 1/5 PERS incentive, new hires, the Title I incentive monies for transfer and retention. There's a pay for performance incentive program, the teacher supply reimbursement program, and the Acceleration Schools incentive. With the exception of the Acceleration Schools incentive, all of these programs are legislatively mandated and directed. So. All right, so when it comes to the PERS incentive, this is actually an incentive that is being phased out. The program phase out began in July of 2007, and under NRS 391-165, the district was required to purchase PERS service credit for employees who met certain mandated criteria, so working in high needs schools, in particular subject areas, effective performance, etc. The phase out process that began in the 2007 legislative session had employees choose between two options. One was to continue in the PERS purchase service program, but there was a cap. They could accumulate from that point forward no more than 5 increments of 1/5 purchase, or they could choose an incentive program that allowed for 2 lump sum payments of approximately $3,500. So we had a very small number of people opt for the lump sum payment. Most chose the PERS option, and as a part of that phase out, we are down to 22 participants in the 2019-20 school year. When we'll get to 0 is a little bit hard to anticipate because as teachers move into areas that do qualify them and they were hired before 2007, that number could go up and down a little bit, but it is a very small number at this point, and as of now, program funding is provided through a state grant program for that. So there are still a few teachers receiving that benefit. I mentioned earlier that during the 2015 legislative session, SB 511 created a funding appropriation that's grant-based for new hire incentives. And on the slide here is information on the eligibility criteria. Each slide we tried to format the same when it comes to the next 4 or 5 incentives. But up at the top is the 2019-20 criteria. If there's an asterisk next to it, that is criteria that is either mandated in statute or in regulation. And so in order to be eligible, the employees would need to meet that specific criteria. And then there are some other notations about like highly effective or effective evaluation, and then the year that that particular criteria went into effect as it relates to this incentive. So I think this is a great example of kind of the guardrails that I talked about earlier, right? The considerations that need to be made when we're trying to determine how to work within the pot of money that we are given and maximize that, obviously, for return on investment. So the criteria for 1920 is classroom teachers at a Title I, 1 or 2 star school. They need to be full-time. There's a performance evaluation component and an attendance component as well. There's data there on what we've paid out in terms of totals each year, and previous criteria has reflected the ability, like I said, to focus on areas of particular need. So while this year it's focused on Title I, 1 and 2 star schools and new hires for those positions, in the past there have been components or required components around specific professional learning. You'll see the Equity 101 notation there. And special education teachers. So I'm going to talk at the end about program outcomes. I think the common theme that you'll see throughout is that in legislative years, it can be challenging to really use this money for the greatest benefit, because like this year is a great example. The session went right up to the end. Our funding was very much undetermined until the very last minute, which happens to be sort of the middle of the recruiting season for us. And so while we can, we can use that to our advantage to say, yeah, there's a signing bonus, until you know what that amount is, right? That's difficult for people to move from another area, for example, to say, oh, sure, that that signing bonus will seal the deal for me. So in non-legislative years, it's a little better, right? Because the funding makes it to us a little bit faster. The next two are very similar. There's a focus on Title I schools, and so during the 2017 session, this transfer incentive was created with the goal of having teachers transfer from non-Title I schools to Title I or underperforming schools. This one was one that did have some unintended consequences that were addressed in the 2019 session. So the first iteration in 2017 was just the transfer incentive. And as to be expected, teachers who have, in some cases spent their entire careers in Title I and underperforming schools said, well, that's awesome that you incentivized teachers to come here, but what about me? I've dedicated my whole career, or, so the legislature did attempt to address that during the next session, and I'll cover that on the next slide. That's a retention incentive for teachers who are at Title I schools. There's a lot of criteria that has to be met in order to qualify for this particular incentive, and we didn't have a lot of people that qualified for it in the 2018-19 school year. We are projecting, just based on the movement that we've already had, plus the openings that we have, the number we provided to the Department of Education when we applied for our portion of the funding was 272 employees. I think it's a little early to say whether or not the incentive is driving that behavior or that movement, or if it was also a function of all of the movement that we had this year with all the sixth grades and new schools and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it'd be interesting to see how this plays out over the next couple of years. The award that we received based on our projection of 272 employees, along with the other districts in the state that submitted for funding, looks like that we'll be able to fund at about roughly $1,500 per teacher this year for those who qualify for that transfer incentive. All right, so then the retention incentive, like I said, was implemented during the 2019 session. Very, very similar criteria. It says if you are retained at a Title I school, you will get a retention incentive. Based on the criteria that we had available at the time, we had to submit our projections and the award that we received, that $417,000. It looks like each employee who qualifies will receive about $330 for a retention incentive. All right, so the pay for performance incentive is mandated through AB 434. That was during the 2015 legislative session, and it's like an incentive riddle. So the district shall reserve each fiscal year for the purposes of the program of performance pay and enhanced compensation an amount of money sufficient to provide an increase in base salaries, not including monetary benefits, for not less than 5% of the teachers and administrators employed by the school district, and the amount of the increase must not exceed 10% of the annual base salary of each teacher or administrator for whom the increase is paid. So we are required to have this incentive, and it is not funded, so it's money that we have to work with the business office to set aside through the general fund. And so this is definitely one where we have to create criteria that is not only compliant with the law, but gets us to that target number of not less than 5% and not having a value of that incentive push anybody over 10%. So typically we have focused on post-probationary status, fully licensed in the area that they're teaching. Highly effective evaluation is a huge component of a pay for performance incentive. This year we are focused on classroom teachers in special education, and so you can see all the detailed criteria there. But this is a big lift for the district. I mean, this is not a small amount of money, and so definitely something to be considered. The teacher supply reimbursement program was created in the 2015 legislative session, and I want to give a shout out to our partners at WEA and a lot of our staff who really did a lot of advocacy work around this during the last session. It was an underutilized incentive because the way that it was originally implemented, I think, we discovered some challenges with that and with having to collect receipts and the timing of the payout and, the timing of when people buy their supplies versus when they could get reimbursed for them. And so I know that Natha and her team did a lot of advocacy work at the session, and I think this is a really good news story, right? So if you look at the last 4 years of implementation, about 1,000 people taking advantage of a program where they were getting about, $180. This year, we did our first payout in December. We still have some funds that will allow us to provide this reimbursement for teachers hired after the end of August. So we'll do another payout in the next couple months. But so far, we've already had 2,713 teachers take advantage of it, and they're getting $240 each. So, so that's a huge win. And the business office was great to work with in meeting the new requirements of the law. We had to develop a board policy, which you all approved, and then implementation of the policy. I wish Robert was here because we used Teams to have a form, and people just did it online, and so it was great. And then finally, the Acceleration Schools Incentive. This was created through a general fund appropriation to support our highest need schools, and this is focused on the principals and principal leadership at our acceleration schools. So in an effort to attract highly talented principals, there's a signing bonus available of $3,500, and the folks who receive that are asked to complete a 3-year commitment to the school. And then as a retention incentive, there's an annual incentive available of $1,500 for those principals who didn't receive the signing bonus in the same year. You can only get one or the other. And then they're effective or highly effective on their evaluation, and there's some language around successful completion of the school year tied to the school performance plan and how effective they were in implementing the components of the school performance plan. So I mentioned that we would talk about program analysis. I think, just kind of in a snapshot format. Obviously, the PERS incentive is not terribly effective anymore since we're phasing it out. The new hire incentives, I mentioned the timing of the award impacts our ability to use it for recruiting or not. I think the same can be said of the Title I incentives. So I think the same pattern will be true. Legislative year, maybe not as effective. Non-legislative year, perhaps more effective, because we're able to get that criteria out sooner, right? When people are making decisions about whether or not to stay or to transfer, if they don't have this information, obviously it's not going to inform their behavior. So I think that's something that we will continue to evaluate over a period of time. The pay for performance plan, I think educators largely feel frustrated by it because of all the criteria, right? Some mandated, some not. Is it truly driving behavior? And then, like I said, it's a huge lift for the district's general fund. Teacher supply, positive educator benefit, huge win. And then I think when we look at the data around acceleration schools, and we look at whether or not it has been effective in attracting and retaining talented leadership to those schools, the numbers appear to indicate to me that it has been.
Thank you so much, Emily. Do my fellow trustees have any questions, or Trustee Cotto?
Yeah, thank you. So the Title I incentives, I think that's great. Have you seen a negative impact, though, on the schools that kind of sit in the middle, to where they're not Title I, but they don't have necessarily the strong PTOs or PTAs that are funding a lot of things? Those schools that are right in the middle, have you seen a negative impact on them with incentives for teachers to move to Title I?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we really do need to monitor. It's it's not an established enough incentive to definitively say. And like I mentioned, the first year we had almost no one qualify to receive the incentive, and that's because the award to us came out much after the fact, right? Transfers were already done. So then year 2 of that incentive, we did see a significant uptick in the amount of movement from non-title to title, but it also was coincident with all of our reorganization and student movement, which then created a lot of staff movement too. So I think we have to be conscientious about that. This year we're going to have another wave of 6th grade movement happening, so I don't know that this year will give us a clear indication either. But interestingly enough, most of the districts in Nevada are not submitting for those funds for the very reason that you're talking about, right? So my colleague Dawn in Lyon, I asked her whether or not they were going to be submitting for the funds, and she said, we have such a small number of schools, and half are title and half are not, that we would really be creating a detrimental situation for our non-title schools if we said, hey, everybody fled to title. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about that and kind of look at the trends over years to make sure that we don't have that become an unintended consequence.
Yeah, I think that would be something for our district to look at as far as incentives. Because when I visit schools, talking to principals of those schools in the middle, they talk about, we don't have that PTO that's going to fund a lot of these things and support our teachers, but we also aren't getting the Title I money, and so we are just trying to figure it out, and sometimes they feel like they're being left behind, and they would like to see the district to recognize them in some way. I don't know what that is, but it's something I think we should be aware of when we're thinking about incentives, to not forget about those middle schools that are struggling in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The bubbles, yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges too, and one of the things that Kristen and I talked about, Dr. McNeil and I talked about when we were talking about this presentation, was that I think there's sort of a larger misconception that we do have more control over what these incentives look like. I'm sorry, I'm cold, so now I can't talk. I think your point is well taken, right? I think it's absolutely valid. I think the bubble schools are experiencing challenges in a lot of different realms. But I hope what I have conveyed tonight is that in terms of district-driven incentives, there really aren't any, right? So it's not like we're just creating incentive programs and we forgot about them. I think within the AB 483 framework, right, that pay for performance incentive, that's really the only spot that we could look to say perhaps we focus this money and this incentive on these groups of schools. But then we have that not less than 5%, not more than 10% parameter we need to work in. And I think I just have to work with the business office, right, to figure out what kind of criteria we could create in order to positively impact those schools. So, but that's certainly information that we can share with Lindsay and obviously our legislators too, is that the bubble schools are feeling left behind in incentives, and I'm sure there are a handful of other areas.
Yeah. Trustee Simon Holland.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank you for this report, and just the way you've organized it, Emily, is so helpful. And you anticipated the questions about, so here's what's wrong with this one, here's what's wrong with that one, here's the history of how it's changed over time. Just hugely helpful. And I think those issues about the timing of the awards, it speaks to something that Dr. McNeil said at the State Department of Education board meeting when they asked for, how can we all be helping you better? And the timing of release of things like these incentives is, you might as well not do it if you're not going to let us have the money at a time when it will be helpful. So having this kind of documentation and being able to share it with folks who are asking those questions, I think is going to be really helpful. So thank you for putting together a great report.
Thank you. And I hate to beat up on them, right, because I know that they've got a lot of things that they're working on too, but it really is, it's a huge concern, right? We'd love to be able to use the money to try and drive the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve, and then it's hard too when you're requested to come now deliver a presentation to them on what outcomes you got out of it. And it's like, well.
Thank you. Trustee Kelly.
Thank you, Madam President. I like this report as well, but it's mostly for full-time employees, primarily our teachers, which makes sense because they're our primary staff and they do such great work. But I'd like to see something similar, maybe this report expanded, that would also talk about some of the incentives that we have for our substitute teachers. Are there, what incentives do we have for our counselors, our custodians, our bus drivers? I mean, I'd just like to see it all. And if we don't have anything, or if it's what we have is so minimal for those other employee groups, that's something I think we should be talking about as well. Like, what can we do if there's funding available? If there's not, of course, then our hands are tied. But I would just like to see this just expanded and see what we can talk about for other employee groups too.
You got the whole package.
Okay.
This is everything. I did forget the incentive we did for subs at the end of the year last year. If you worked 20 days, you got an extra dollar amount, $250 or something like that. So I could provide an update on that. But in terms of ongoing incentives, we don't have any others.
And do you think that's partly then because the legislature they don't really see maybe what our other employees are doing, like maybe our other employee groups aren't at the legislature and as forced enough to, and so that might be something that we could think about. What can we do to try to help out with other employee groups in front of the legislature, to let the legislature know that these are groups that with certain incentives, it'd be much easier for all school districts to fill positions and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point.
Dr. McNeil.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Emily for putting this report together. It is confusing enough for staff to understand what all the incentives are, so we thought that it would be very beneficial for the trustees to have a presentation that you all would then be able to take with you when you're out at schools or when you're out in the public, that you could kind of package and talk about the incentives. As somebody that actually did their dissertation around middle schools and climate and culture and incentives, I can tell you that the number one benefit for staying has to do with the school leadership and the climate and the culture of the schools. We know that incentives are extremely important and very valuable, but at the end of the day, it's who's leading the charge and what the climate and culture are of that school. So thank you again, Emily, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Great. And we have a public comment from our one member of the public.
Hello, public. Nathan Anderson, member of the public. President of WEA. First of all, I just wanted to thank Emily and her team. She always reaches out to make sure to work with us on any of the incentives that are impacting our bargaining unit. And so although we have 2,500 members, it's all 4,000 that we've got to be aware of. There are two things I wanted to bring up. First of all, under the pay for performance incentive, WEA as well as NSCA at the state level and NEA at the national level, we've always had a problem with pay for performance because there's so many things that are outside of the realm of the educator's ability. And so that's one element, and the other element that is a problem as well is it creates a competition when a competition does not need to exist. And so I just wanted to put that out there, and hopefully there'll be some changes in the next session when it comes to that, because that's an awful lot of money that has to be found out of a general fund. The second thing I wanted to bring up actually had to do with Trustee Kelly's comments about the other groups. I do personally, as well as I know our organization does, find it very difficult that it's always the teachers. It's never about the counselors. It's never about the speech language pathologist. And it's also very rarely about our substitute teachers, or our bus drivers, or some of our other things, our other elements, excuse me. And we would always try to bring that up during lobbying tactics. It was never just the teachers. It was always everybody else too. But unfortunately, from the PR point of view, everybody has their favorite second grade teacher. Mrs. Douglas for me. She was awesome. Or Mr. Horlacher in high school. And yet, how often do we have somebody that has their favorite bus driver? Which, by the way, I did. Hal. I think it was Hal. And so, like, how often do we think about that? And so from a PR point of view, that's why often we don't talk about the other education employees as we should. Finally, it's a compliment. I just really, again, want to thank the Washington County School District for working with us on getting this information out about our teacher supply fund. bringing it from 32% participating to almost 75, huge. And so there are some people I really wanted to point out in particular. Lindsay Anderson from GR, she always would work with us on just about everything. And even when we disagreed on some things, it was always in a professional fashion. In this case, we worked really well together. Mark Mathers and Rob Luna and Jill Murdoch. Oh, really? I'm the only one here. And Jill Murdoch really worked hard from grants and trying to make sure that we had the money before December, and I think that made another really big difference. And then finally, Anna, Savala, and Emily, 7 emails to remind us to turn in that paperwork, 7. That's huge. And when we hear so often about how we don't hear anything, to get 7 was perfect, and I have 1 second left. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Well, and thank you, Emily. I think for me, it just struck me that I had never asked for, but I'd also just never seen this information presented in one, concise page and documents or spread PowerPoint. So I appreciate, because I do get questions about it, being able to have something to refer back to and know more about. I did have one question. For any or all of these, is the amount static based on, just a percentage for each district, and then we can fill in however many employees, or is it based on a per employee?
So generally what happens is we get a request for a projection. So for example, on the new hire incentive, how many people do you think will be eligible based on this criteria? And then we submit that number to Department of Ed, and then they look at everything that's been submitted and say, okay, usually they present 2 options to the state board, and so, we can fund it at this level this is how this played out for this last set of new hire and the 2 Title ones. They said we could use the appropriation for the whole biennium this year and pay this amount per employee for this total for the district, or we can split the funds and we'll pay this amount now and this amount later. And so those numbers are not static at all, and depend entirely on how many projected qualifiers each district submits.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, public. All right. Our last item on the regular agenda is 6.04, information, discussion, and possible action to appoint a member or members of the Board of Trustees to the following non-Washoe County School District public bodies pursuant to Board Policy 9100. Committees of the Board of Trustees, Appendix A, list of committees: Debt Management Commission, Nevada Association of School Boards, Board of Directors, and Executive Committee, Regional Planning Governing Board, and the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. And this is for possible action, as I said. And so we just started discussion. Yep. Okay. So we're again looking at the Debt Management Commission, which currently is served by Trustee Cotto. The NASB Board of Directors, I always get these mixed up. That's you, Trustee Kelly, correct? And then the Executive Committee is me. And then the Regional Planning Governing Board is currently served by Trustee Simon Holland, and as well as the EDON Board. And, okay, let's start with Debt Management. Trustee Cotto, would you like to continue, or would you like to?
I would like to continue, because I would assume Dr. Taylor will stay on NIAA. And they asked me to continue because they only meet 4 times a year, and they'd like to have some sort of continuity. So I'd be happy to continue on that committee.
Okay. And I asked earlier, checked with our legal counsel. I don't know, JJ, if you would have more information. NIAA is not on here because it's a 2-year term, so
yes.
It's not up for, okay.
Correct.
And there's a few others that are on the big list that aren't on here for various reasons. So, Is there anyone else that is interested in serving on the Debt Management Commission? Okay, so we'll continue to be served by Trustee Cottle on that. Oh, okay. Each at a time? Okay, so I would be looking for a motion to continue. There, it's right there.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we've got Trustee Cottle. So then we can move on to the NASB Board of Directors and start open discussion for that. And Trustee Kelly, would you be interested in continuing that?
Yes, I would be interested in continuing. The good thing about this one, at least for me, is that it meets just 4 or 5 times a year, but different parts of the state. One meeting might be in Winnemucca, another in Ely, another in Vegas, 1 or 2 in Reno. And it actually works out really well with my full-time position because I can attend the meeting and do all that, and then afterwards I can just go visit the local prisons and do work stuff. So it works out well with me in that way. Plus I enjoy it. So.
Can I also add, Madam President, I know in the past the leadership of NASB has asked us to invest in bringing people up the ranks and hopefully running for offices in NASB. So those who will still be here are, that's appreciated for you to stay on. Obviously, it's not as valuable for someone like me who's not going to be here after this year. So,
all right. Looking for a motion on that one.
So moved.
Thank you. Let's have a second from Trustee Minetto. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so that passes unanimously for Trustee Kelly. And I'll just say that I would like to continue to serve as a member of the Executive Committee for NASB. I think they appreciate the continuity of having someone there for a couple years in a row, and we have a new executive director in place there, so I'd like to continue that work. So, all right, I'd be looking for a motion on that.
So moved. Oh.
Second.
Now you guys can fight over it. All right, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that one stays the same. And now moving on to the Regional Planning Governing Board.
Yes,
And-
I am willing, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue in that if you all are comfortable with that. It's a fairly technical role, and just because of my history, it's been helpful for me having had the planning background. So I'd be happy to continue representing the district on that.
Yeah, I'd say I personally think that would be great to have your continuity there.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And then the EDON Board of Trustees.
And I'd also be very happy to continue there as well. Been on the EDON board for many, many years, and would just continue if that's okay with you all.
So moved.
Okay, got a motion from Trustee Cottle. Second from Vice President Taylor. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great.
Thank you.
Quick and easy.
No arm wrestling, no begging, no, yeah.
Robust debate. We didn't have any.
Oh,
good.
There's no robust debate here.
All right, so we'll move on to our board reports. If anyone would like to make one, I know we've had a little bit of downtime over the holiday, but people have been in action at least for a week. Trustee Cottle.
Yeah, I gotta say this one. Before the break, interim superintendent McNeil and myself did a school visit at Hall Elementary School. And it was probably one of the coolest school visits I've been to because we got there and there was a group of fifth graders ready to lead us around, and they had a plan. And every classroom we visited, a student in the class presented Dr. McNeil with a puzzle piece.
Oh, cool.
And when we were done, she put the puzzle together, and it was something that they made. So
So neat.
completely student run. fifth graders and younger. And so it was pretty cool to see. And it was cool to see they have this specialized room that's like, what did they call it? The wellness room. There was music and just things where students can go and staff can go into this classroom and just unwind. And
great.
so it was a pretty cool visit.
And the puzzle is actually hanging in my office.
Yeah.
Oh, neat. Put together.
Well, we can just move down the line and then circle back around. Trustee Kelly, anything from you? Okay. Trustee Simon Holland?
Yeah, I set a goal for myself this year to visit all of my schools in my district during the school year, and I have 47. And I'm down to, as of next week, I will only have 12 left to go. Yeah, I did 8 school visits just since school came back in from the break. And, you know, as we all know, love it. And I really want to give a shout out to Jen Jimenez, who has made that all possible. I know she's supporting all of us, but it's a challenge, but it's really great and worth it. And thank you for the superintendent visits you're doing that I get to tag along on, so I can check that one
Cross
out.
it off the list. Trustee Calvert, anything from you? Great. Student Rep Noble?
Visit any schools?
Oh, well, I didn't have the pleasure of visiting any schools except for Worcester. But what I will say is on the Student Advisory Council, we are working on some pretty big things. The most immediate of which will be a traffic and pedestrian safety PSA that we will be writing and working with the district to help produce and make as an effort on our part to get through to our fellow students.
That's great. Thank you. Trustee Minetto?
I have visited a whole bunch, just don't have nearly as many as you do, and since Christmas too. And it's interesting how the elementary schools I go to, they're all like kind of glad the 6th graders are gone, and yet they kind of miss them. And I think that's the bittersweet of it, I guess.
Thank you.
For me, the only thing I got to do over our break is for the first time I was able to attend the graduation for the IB students, and that was and several of my colleagues were there as well, and that was it was really cool. They actually, of course, they graduated in May, but many of them, most of them, in fact, came back because they have to send all their things in to the IB people nationally. And then get their certification. It comes after the school year ends, so traditionally they'll have it that last weekend right before the Christmas break. So it was really good. And so many of those students came back, and our students fared really well. We had 8 students that scored. We had 12. We had 11 to 12. I forgot which. 11 to 12 scores that were actually the highest that you can get, and only like 8% of the students achieved that score. So, worldwide in the world. So I was really, really proud of our students, and they just look more mature 6 months after graduating from high school. So yeah, they really do. So it was just a pleasure an honor to get to be at the IB graduation.
That's great. Well, thank you. I was going to say that, and you said it well and better than me, so I will pass. And so we move on to 7.02, the interim superintendent's report.
So just real quick, I do want to thank all of the trustees for attending the Worcester IB. That is really important for the students to be able to have that support. So thank you all. That was back on December 21. Since that time, we've been able to visit Westergaard Elementary, had a great visit with Principal Ben Dixon. Matthews, wonderful opportunity to sit down. My focus around this year is new principals, so April Caldini. Pine Middle School, had a brief visit with Brad Boudreau over there. Bud Beasley went there last Friday, spent some time with Mary Ellen Arascata. Wonderful visit. This past Friday, I was present for a virtual strategic planning meeting. I was voted onto the board for Jobs for Nevada Graduates. So we'll be going forward with that, which is awesome. Continuing our association leadership meeting with all 5 of our associations. We had that meeting yesterday. It was great, very productive. We had our behavior task force meeting that Dr. LaMarca mentioned yesterday. Thursday of this week, just for the millions of people that are watching, our Zoning Advisory Committee meeting, Thursday at Silver Lake Elementary at 5:30 p.m. And then for the Board of Trustees, you all will be receiving not only an invitation to our Student Voice convening on Friday, February 28th, but an amazing, beautifully printed sweatshirt. So you all will get one of those. What date is that? You'll get an invitation. It is Friday, February 28th. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Interim Superintendent. All right. That takes us on to our future agenda item request, item 8.01. Do any of the trustees have agenda items they'd like to request? Trustee Kelly.
I have one. It's been a while, I think, since we've heard about our Montessori charter schools. And so I'd like to do an agenda item where we can learn more about how things are going with them. And I heard that they're looking at expanding possibly a new campus or expanding an existing campus. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what's going on with that. So.
All right. Thank you. Trustee Simon Holland.
I just wanted to put a flag in to make sure that when the zoning work comes back, that we address and give a lot of explanation on the public record about the Reno Sparks Indian Colony issues. I know you responded to it today, and I just wanted to make sure we plug that in to that discussion when it comes from the Zoning Advisory Committee.
All right. Any others? Okay. And lastly, public comment. 8.02, so we'll move on. So 8.03, our next meeting is Tuesday, January 28th, here in this building, in this room. And then I will adjourn the meeting.